The morning sun burned through the Virginia haze like a slow exposure photograph, turning the distant Blue Ridge Mountains into layered silhouettes of purple and gold. Quantico Marine Base sprawled across the landscape with the ordered precision of a military installation, all clean lines and purposeful geometry. The extreme long-range qualification course sat at the eastern edge of the complex, a stretch of scrubland and carefully engineered firing positions that reached out toward nothing but sky and distance. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane stood at firing position 3, the Barrett M107A1 resting against his shoulder like it had been born there. 28 years old and built like a recruitment poster, he embodied everything the modern warrior was supposed to be. 6'2" of disciplined muscle, hair cut with geometric precision, eyes that tracked movement with the cold efficiency of the very expensive optics mounted on his rifle. He wore his confidence the way other men wore their uniforms, as if it were a regulation issue. The morning qualification was going exactly as Marcus expected. His team, 5 hand-picked Marine Scout snipers from 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion, moved through their paces with the synchronized efficiency of men who had trained together until they could read each other's breathing patterns. The targets at 1,000 meters went down like dominoes. The Barrett spoke its deep, thunderous language, and steel sang back in response. Corporal Danny Chen, Marcus's spotter, fed him wind data from the Kestrel weather meter without needing to be asked. 2 clicks left. Slight updraft at 600 meters. Temperature rising 3 degrees since last string. The numbers flowed between them like a private conversation, translated instantly into adjustments that put rounds through metal with metronomic regularity. It was beautiful in its way, the marriage of cutting-edge technology and perfectly conditioned human performance. Marcus believed in it with the fervor of the converted. He had grown up in an age where every problem had a technical solution, where apps could order your groceries and algorithms could predict your preferences before you knew them yourself. Why should warfare be any different? The rifle was no longer just a rifle. It was a platform. The scope was no longer just glass and crosshairs. It was a ballistic computer that measured atmospheric pressure, calculated Coriolis effect, adjusted for spin drift and temperature gradients, then delivered a firing solution accurate to within a tenth of a minute of angle. The old ways were romantic, sure. Marcus had read the books. Carlos Hathcock in Vietnam, estimating range by eye and calculating windage with nothing but experience and intuition. It was impressive for its time, the way a Model T Ford was impressive for its time. But you did not drive a Model T when you could drive a Tesla. The sound of an engine, old and laboring, broke through the morning rhythm of the range. Marcus glanced up from his scope, irritation flickering across his features like a brief static charge. A pickup truck was approaching along the access road, Opacitone, ancient enough that its original color was a matter of archaeological speculation. Primer gray fought with rust red and faded blue for dominance across the body panels. It coughed and wheezed its way toward the parking area like a smoker climbing stairs. Lance Corporal Rodriguez lowered his spotting scope, a grin already spreading across his face. "Here comes your grandma, Kane. Did you tell her family day was next month?" The truck settled into a parking spot with a final shuddering gasp, and the driver's door opened. What emerged made Marcus's jaw tighten with the particular frustration of a man who knows he is about to waste time he does not have. She was small. That was his first impression. Maybe 5'4", and that was being generous. Silver gray hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked tactical. She wore jeans that had seen better decades, hiking boots that looked older than Rodriguez, and a field jacket that might have been olive drab once, but had faded into a color that had no name. She moved with an economy of motion that seemed deliberate, each step placed with care, as if she were navigating terrain only she could see. But it was what she pulled from the truck bed that transformed irritation into outright disbelief. A rifle case. Long, heavy, the kind of case that predated plastic and believed in craftsmanship. Wood reinforced with brass corners, scuffed and scarred like it had traveled through time itself. She lifted it with a casual strength that contradicted her appearance, settling it against her hip with the practiced ease of someone who had carried heavy things across long distances. Marcus exchanged glances with his team. Sergeant Jake Morrison, the team lead, who was technically Marcus's superior but deferred to him in matters of marksmanship, just shook his head slowly. "This is going to be good," he muttered. The woman walked toward the firing line with that same deliberate gait, her eyes scanning the range with a systematic thoroughness that pings something in the back of Marcus's trained awareness. She was not looking at the targets. She was reading the environment, the wind flags, the heat mirage starting to shimmer off the baked earth, the angle of the sun. It was the kind of automatic environmental scan that took years to develop, but Marcus dismissed the observation as quickly as it formed. Plenty of recreational shooters developed habits that looked professional. He straightened, adopting the polite but firm tone he had perfected for dealing with confused civilians on base. Ma'am, I think you might have taken a wrong turn. The civilian recreational range is about 2 miles back toward the main gate. This is a military qualification course. The woman stopped, turning those eyes on him with a directness that was almost physical. They were pale blue, faded like old denim, but sharp, unnervingly sharp. She offered a small smile that did not quite reach those eyes. I believe I am in the right place, Sergeant. Staff Sergeant, Marcus corrected automatically, then caught himself. The rifle case rested against her leg, and he could see now that it bore no modern markings, no manufacturer logos, just the deep patina of age and use. Ma'am, with all due respect, we are running extreme long-range qualifications today. We are shooting out to 2,000 meters with 50 caliber platforms. This really is not the place for... He trailed off as she knelt, her movements fluid despite what had to be at least 65 years on this earth, and began unlatching the case. The team drifted closer, curiosity overriding training for just a moment. Marcus felt his irritation spike. He did not have time for this. They had a schedule. The rangemaster was expecting them to complete their quals by 1400 hours. The latches clicked, open with sounds like small bones breaking, and the lid lifted. The rifle inside drew a collective intake of breath that might have been appreciation or might have been suppressed laughter. It was massive, built on a scale that made even the Barrett look almost delicate. But it looked like something that belonged in a museum, mounted on a wall with a small placard explaining its historical significance. The stock was a single piece of dark walnut, polished to a deep glow by what had to be a century of handling. The barrel was thick enough to use as a club, a bull barrel of blued steel that had lost some of its luster to time, but none of its presence. The action was a straight bolt, massive and simple, the kind of mechanism that belonged to an era when tolerances were measured by craftsmen's hands rather than computer-controlled mills. But it was the scope that truly marked it as an antique. A long brass tube with external adjustment knobs the size of quarters, no illuminated reticle, no ballistic computer, no rangefinder, just glass and metal, and the faith that human skill could compensate for the lack of technology. Rodriguez could not contain himself. Ma'am, did Daniel Boone lend you that? The others laughed, not cruelly, but with the easy condescension of young men who believed they had already learned everything worth knowing. Even Morrison cracked a smile, though he had the grace to try to hide it. Marcus cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Ma'am, that is a beautiful piece. Really. But it is not safe for modern magnum loads. The pressures involved, the recoil forces, a rifle that age could come apart, and we cannot have that liability on a military range. I am going to have to ask you to... I am cleared for this range. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his words like a blade through silk. There was no anger in it, no defensiveness, just a simple statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. Marcus felt heat creep up the back of his neck. With all due respect, ma'am, I do not think you understand what we do here. This is not plinking with a .22. We are engaging targets at distances where you need advanced optics just to see them. That scope probably could not resolve a man-sized target past 800 meters, and we are shooting well beyond that. She ran a hand along the walnut stock, a gesture so gentle it might have been affectionate. She has handled worse than a hot day in the desert, Sergeant. Staff Sergeant, Marcus corrected again, his patience fraying. Look, I am sure you are very attached to that rifle, but if you will check with your range safety officer, you will find my name on the roster. Elena Cross. The confidence in her voice made Marcus pause. He keyed his radio, irritation sharpening his tone. Tower, this is Recon 1. Got a civilian on the line, name of Cross. Can you confirm she is cleared for extreme long range? He said the last part with heavy emphasis, making it clear he expected this to be resolved quickly. The civilians would be redirected and they could get back to their schedule. The radio crackled. The voice that came back belonged to Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Reyes, the Rangemaster, a man with 22 years in the Corps and a reputation for suffering fools approximately never. Affirmative, Recon 1s. Miss Cross is cleared for all distances up to and including the 5,000-meter contingency target. The silence that followed had weight, physical weight. It pressed down on the firing line like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Marcus lowered the radio slowly, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. The 5,000-meter target was not a real target. It was a joke. A massive steel plate set at a distance so absurd it was used exclusively for testing sensor equipment and occasionally for artillery spotters who needed reference points. Hitting it with a rifle was not just difficult. It was a statistical impossibility. The bullet drop alone would be over 1,000 feet. The flight time would be 12 seconds. 12 seconds during which the wind could shift, the temperature could change. The curvature of the Earth itself became a factor in the ballistics. No one shot at the 5,000-meter target? No one. Rodriguez spoke first, his voice uncertain. "Sarge, did he just say 5,000 meters?" Morrison finished, his usual confidence replaced by confusion. "That has to be a mistake." But Marcus was looking at Elena Cross with new eyes, and what he saw troubled him in ways he could not quite articulate. The gentle grandmother image was cracking like old paint, and underneath was something that did not fit any category he had in his mental filing system. She stood there with perfect stillness, her weight distributed evenly, her breathing slow and controlled. Her hands resting on the rifle case were wrinkled with age but absolutely steady. No tremor, no nervous energy, just the deep, centered calm of someone who had nothing to prove and all the time in the world. He swallowed, tasting copper and pride. "All right then, find a spot, ma'am. Range goes hot in 5 minutes." She nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement, and moved to firing position 7, the farthest point from Marcus's team. She did not hurry. Every movement was deliberate, economical, the kind of efficiency that came from decades of practice until waste motion had been burned away like impurities from metal. Marcus turned back to his own station, but his focus was fractured. He went through the motions of setting up for the next string, but part of his attention stayed locked on the old woman as she established her position. She laid out a simple canvas shooting mat, the kind Marines had used in Vietnam. She produced a small leather-bound notebook and a pencil. Not a tactical pen, not a waterproof notepad, a pencil that had been sharpened with a knife, and a notebook that looked like it had survived multiple wars. She opened it, and even from a distance, Marcus could see pages filled with handwritten notes, sketches, calculations done in margins. Then she opened the rifle case fully and began her setup, and despite himself, despite his irritation and confusion, Marcus found himself watching with growing fascination. The rifle came out in pieces. She assembled it with the practiced motions of a surgical team, each component fitting together with precision that spoke of thousands of repetitions. The scope mounted to the receiver with brass rings that had been hand-fitted. She checked the bore with a small mirror, angling it to catch the light, her eyes sharp as she inspected for any fouling or obstruction. Satisfied, she produced a single enormous brass cartridge from a worn leather pouch on her belt. The round made Marcus's ammunition look modest. It was a .50 caliber, but longer, heavier, the brass case gleaming like old gold. A Wildcat cartridge, something custom-loaded for one specific purpose in one specific rifle. She chambered it with a smooth motion, and the bolt closed with a solid mechanical click that carried across the range like a punctuation mark. From the range safety officer tower, a 2-story observation post that overlooked the entire course, Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes watched through high-power binoculars. He had been about to radio down and have the old woman redirected when something stopped him. Not her appearance, not even the antique rifle. It was her bearing. Reyes had served in Fallujah, Helmand Province, and a dozen other places that appeared on maps with careful vagueness. He had worked with scout snipers, MARSOC operators, and a few legendary figures from Delta Force, whose names were never spoken above a whisper. He recognized competence the way a musician recognized perfect pitch. It was not something you could fake or learn from a manual. It was the product of thousands of hours under pressure where mistakes had consequences measured in lives. This woman moved like an operator. Not like she was trying to move like an operator. She just was. Every action had purpose. No wasted energy. No hesitation. Her head was on a constant, subtle swivel. Those pale blue eyes tracking everything, processing wind direction from the flags, heat mirage patterns, the position of the sun, the way shadows fell across the terrain. It was unconscious, automatic. The mark of someone who had operated in environments where environmental awareness was not a skill, but a survival mechanism. Reyes lowered his binoculars, a knot of curiosity tightening in his gut. He decided to let it play out. Sometimes the best way to understand a situation was to give it room to develop. The range horn blared, a sharp metallic note that signaled hot status. Marcus and his team began their work, engaging targets at 1,000 and 1,500 meters. The Barrett spoke with its characteristic deep boom, a sound that Marcus associated with confidence and capability. They were good, no question about it. Rounds landed on steel with satisfying regularity, the spotters calling corrections for the tricky crosswind that was picking up as the morning heated the desert floor. 2 clicks left, Chen called. Slight updraft building. Marcus made the adjustment without thought, muscle memory and training combining into fluid action. He settled the crosshairs, controlled his breathing, felt for that moment between heartbeats when everything aligned, and pressed the trigger. The target at 1,500 meters rang like a bell. Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. Beautiful, Kane, absolutely beautiful. Marcus allowed himself a tight smile, then glanced toward firing position 7. Elena Cross had not fired a single shot. She lay behind her rifle in a prone position that looked almost geological in its stability. She had become part of the earth, low and solid, her body molded to the terrain with the kind of integration that took years to develop. She was not looking through her scope. She was just watching, waiting. Guess she is just here to watch, boys, Marcus said, loud enough to carry. Maybe she will learn something. Rodriguez snorted. Yeah, like how real operators do it. But Reyes, watching from the tower through optics that could resolve a human face at 2,000 meters, knew better. She was not watching. She was reading. Reading the story the landscape was telling her. The subtle shift of the grass responding to wind currents. The lazy spiral of a dust devil forming 1,000 meters downrange. The way the heat haze danced and distorted the air at different distances, creating layers of mirage that bent light like water. The Marines were raiding data off screens. She was reading the world. 20 minutes passed. Marcus and his team completed their qualification strings, each man putting rounds through distant steel with the kind of consistency that would earn them high marks on their official records. They were good, and they knew it. Their equipment was state-of-the-art. Their training was comprehensive. They represented the cutting edge of military marksmanship. And still, the old woman had not fired. Marcus finished his final string, a particularly challenging set of targets at 1,800 meters in the building crosswind. He had adapted well, using the ballistic computer to compensate for the shifting conditions, and his hit rate was 90%, excellent by any standard. He stood, stretching muscles that had been locked in position for over an hour, and could not resist walking toward firing position 7. Morrison followed, along with Chen and Rodriguez. Curiosity had overcome whatever embarrassment they had felt about the situation. Elena Cross did not acknowledge their approach. She remained motionless, her eye pressed to that brass scope, her left hand tucked under the rifle stock in a position that looked almost loving. Her breathing was so slow and controlled that from a distance, she might have appeared not to be breathing at all. Marcus cleared his throat. Ma'am, the qualification window closes in 40 minutes. If you are going to shoot, you need to. The range PA system crackled to life, cutting him off. The voice was Reyes, his tone professional, but carrying an undercurrent of something Marcus could not quite identify. Attention, all shooters. For our final evolution, we are testing the new target retrieval system on the contingency target. The 4,800-meter target is now active. I repeat, 4,800 meters. This is an equipment test only. Do not engage. 4,800 meters, just over 3 miles. The number hung in the air like a challenge that no one was meant to accept. Rodriguez laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. 3 miles? You would need a mortar for that. Maybe artillery, not a rifle. Marcus looked through his scope, dialing the magnification to maximum. At 25 power, he could barely resolve the target, a white-painted steel plate that shimmered in the distance like a mirage. It was hopeless. Absurd. The bullet would arc hundreds of feet into the air before beginning its long descent. The wind would push it yards off course. The temperature gradients alone would make accurate calculation nearly impossible. Then a quiet voice cut through the morning air, calm and steady as a heartbeat. Tower, this is Cross at firing point 7, requesting permission to engage the 4,800-meter target. The radio silence was total and absolute. Every Marine on the line froze. Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical impact, and for a moment he could not process them. It had to be a joke, a sign of confusion, maybe even early dementia. You could not be serious about shooting at that distance. It was not just difficult, it was impossible. Ma'am, he said, his voice strained with disbelief, you cannot be serious. The bullet drop alone would be over 1,000 feet. The flight time, the wind, it is not possible. Elena did not turn, did not acknowledge him at all. Her focus remained entirely downrange, her body still locked in that perfect prone position. She simply repeated, her voice carrying clearly in the stillness. Tower requesting permission to engage. In the tower, Reyes felt ice water run down his spine. He had a choice. He could deny it, chalk it up to a confused civilian, avoid any potential embarrassment or danger. It would be the safe decision, the smart decision. Or he could trust the instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen deployments, the gut feeling that was screaming at him that he was about to witness something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He looked at the woman's form through his binoculars one more time. That absolute stillness, that decades of discipline etched into every line of her posture, the way she had integrated herself with the ground, becoming not a person lying down but a firing platform carved from the earth itself. He keyed his mic, his voice tight with anticipation. Firing point 7, you are clear to engage. All other shooters, cease fire. Cease fire. The range is yours, Miss Cross. A hush fell over the desert like a held breath. The wind continued its eternal conversation with the sand and the scrub grass. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth, creating thermals that rose like invisible rivers. And every eye on that firing line turned toward the tiny speck of white steel 3 miles away, waiting to witness the inevitable failure. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, his mind spinning. This was going to be a disaster. A humiliation. He felt secondhand embarrassment already forming. The awkward moment when they would have to comfort this old woman after she missed by 100 yards, explaining to her gently that some things were simply beyond human capability, that there was no shame in not achieving the impossible. Elena's movements became glacially slow. She took a final look at the wind flags, her eyes tracking their movement with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. Then she closed her eyes for a long moment. When they opened, they were clear and focused, stripped of everything except purpose. She made final adjustments to the external dials on that brass scope. Click, click, click. The sounds carried in the silence like small detonations. Each click represented a quarter minute of angle, ancient mechanical precision replacing digital readouts. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and then her entire body became utterly, absolutely still. It was not the stillness of holding position. It was the stillness of stone, of mountains, of geological time. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel sweat forming on his palms despite the dry heat. He wanted to look away, but could not. The rifle was no longer a tool in her hands. It was an extension of will, of intent, of 50 years of mastery distilled into this single moment. The report, when it came, was unlike anything Marcus had heard from the Barrett. It was deeper, a resonant boom that felt less like a sound and more like a pressure wave rolling through his chest, through his bones, through the very air itself. It was the voice of pure, concentrated power. The rifle bucked against Elena's shoulder with recoil that would have knocked a lesser shooter out of position. She absorbed it like bedrock absorbing an earthquake, her body giving just enough to manage the force without breaking that perfect alignment. Her eye never left the scope. Then came the wait. At 4,800 meters, the bullet's flight time stretched into eternity. 1 second. 2. Marcus found himself tracking the vapor trail through his scope, a faint corkscrew line arcing impossibly high into the sky. 3 seconds. 4. The bullet reached its apogee, hundreds of feet above the line of sight, and began its long descent, pulled by gravity, pushed by wind, traveling through air that changed temperature and density with every meter. 5 seconds. 6. The wind took it, pushing it right, but she had accounted for that. 7. 8. It was a silent messenger on a journey measured in miles, each microsecond of flight subject to forces that would take a computer minutes to calculate. Rodriguez held his breath. Chen's hands were white-knuckled on his spotting scope. Morrison just stared, his jaw slack. 9 seconds. 10. Marcus waited for the puff of dust 100 yards wide of the target, the inevitable proof that human skill had limits that no amount of practice could overcome. 11 seconds after the shot, a flicker of movement near the target, a small cloud of dust kicked up from the ground just in front of it. A miss! Marcus started to exhale, relief mixing with pity, his mind already forming the gentle words he would use to. Then it happened. A twelfth of a second later, a bright flash erupted from the center of the tiny white speck. And 2 full seconds after that, the sound finally reached them, carried on the wind like a message from another world. A faint metallic clang, the unmistakable sound of a half-inch thick piece of hardened steel being struck by a massive projectile traveling at supersonic velocity. Dead center. The silence that descended was profound. It was the silence of assumptions being shattered, of certainty being revealed as arrogance, of the impossible becoming real. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His hands started to shake. All his training, all his technology, all his confidence had just been rendered meaningless by what he had witnessed. It was not just a great shot. It was a statement from God himself. Reyes slowly lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white where they gripped the housing. He did not need to confirm the hit. He had seen the impact flare, bright and unmistakable, right in the center mass of the target. 22 years in the Marine Corps, legendary shots in Fallujah, impossible saves in Helmand, places without names where men did things that would never be written down. He had never seen anything like this. This was not marksmanship. This was prophecy. He walked down from the tower on legs that felt uncertain, his mind racing through implications he was not ready to process. He approached firing point 7, and Elena Cross was already calmly ejecting the spent casing, the smell of burnt powder hanging in the air like incense. The brass case, massive and gleaming, tumbled into her hand with a clink of metal on metal. Reyes stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware that he was in the presence of something he did not fully understand. He looked at the rifle with new eyes. Not an antique, a masterpiece of purpose-built engineering, a tool so perfectly matched to its user that they had become a single entity. Then he saw it, a small, faded insignia carved into the walnut stock, nearly worn smooth by decades of handling. A serpent eating its own tail, encircling a single 5-pointed star. It was the mark of a unit that had been officially disbanded in the 1980s. A unit that, according to every document that mattered, had never existed at all. They were called Phantom Cell, the ghosts in the machine of the Cold War. Deniable assets sent to do impossible things in places that appeared on no maps. 12 operators, the best of the best, pulled from Delta, from SEAL Team 6, from Marine Force Recon, and given missions that would never be acknowledged. Reyes drew himself to the position of attention, a gesture of respect that came from somewhere deeper than training. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with a reverence that startled even himself. "Ma'am, that was the finest shot I have ever seen or ever will see." The young Marines approached slowly, their earlier arrogance completely stripped away like paint from old wood. They moved with the uncertain gait of men whose worldview had just been fundamentally restructured. Marcus stood before her, his face flushed with shame, his hands hanging useless at his sides. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking like thin ice. I apologize for my disrespect. I do not understand how—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the sheer scale of his ignorance, the depth of the lesson he had just received. Elena finally looked up at him, and her eyes were not triumphant. They were kind and a little sad. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, one hand resting on the walnut stock with something that might have been affection. "This rifle is not ancient, Sergeant. It is patient." "Staff Sergeant," Marcus corrected automatically, then flinched at his own absurdity. A small smile touched her lips. "You have computers that tell you what the wind is doing, sensors that measure every variable. This rifle and we learn to listen. Your equipment is excellent, truly, but it is a tool. It cannot replace understanding. You feel the wind on your face. You watch the dance of the heat. You become part of the problem you are trying to solve. She tapped her temple gently. The shot does not come from the rifle. It happens here, in your mind, long before you ever touch the trigger. She began to pack her gear with the same deliberate care she had shown in setting up. Each component cleaned and returned to its precise place in the velvet-lined case. The Marines watched in silence, their multi-thousand-dollar rifles suddenly feeling like clumsy, loud toys. They had been humbled not by a person, but by a standard of excellence they had not known existed. As she latched the case closed, Private Chen, the quietest member of the team, spoke up. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, there is a name scratched into the scope mount. It says, Whisper. Is that the rifle's name?" Elena paused, her hand resting on the lid. A shadow passed across her face, memory moving like weather behind those pale eyes. "Number. That was my spotter's call sign, Sergeant David Morgan. We were a team for 12 years. He could read Mirage like it was a book and call wind to the inch from 2 miles out. He made the calculations. I just pulled the trigger." She clicked the latches shut, the sound final and absolute. "He did not make it back from our last deployment. This rifle, it is his legacy. I just come out here every now and then to make sure his voice is not forgotten." She stood, nodded once to Reyes, then to each of the young Marines in turn. Then she walked back to her pickup truck without another word, leaving behind the faint smell of gunpowder and the deafening sound of a lesson learned in the most profound way possible. Reyes and the Marines stood there for a long time, staring out at the impossible distance. The tiny steel plate glinted in the afternoon sun like a distant star, a testament to dedication they had never imagined possible. They were not just looking at a target anymore. They were looking at proof that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield was not the one with the most advanced technology, but the one wielded by a master who had become one with their craft. Marcus felt something he had not felt in years: humility, real bone-deep humility. And underneath it, a desperate hunger to understand, to learn, to become something more than what he was. As Elena's truck disappeared down the access road, coughing blue smoke into the clear Virginia sky, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out absently, his mind still processing what he had witnessed. The text message was from a number he did not recognize. No caller ID, no name, just 8 words that made his blood run cold. "We know who you are, Ghost. Leave now or your past will destroy innocent lives." Marcus looked up sharply, scanning the area, but Elena's truck was already gone, swallowed by distance and dust. He read the message again, his tactical mind immediately jumping to threat assessment. But the message was not for him. It was for her. He turned to Reyes, who was still staring at the distant target, as if it might hold answers to questions he had not yet learned to ask. "Gunny, who is she? Really?" Reyes was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of classified knowledge and the burden of secrets that could never be shared. "That, Kane, is a question you do not want answered. Trust me." But Marcus's mind was already working through the implications. The impossible shot, the mark on the rifle, phantom cell, a unit that never existed, doing missions that never happened. And now someone was threatening her. Someone who knew her past. Someone who knew she was here. He looked down at his phone again, at those 8 chilling words, and made a decision that would change everything. He would find out who Elena Cross really was, and he would find out who was threatening her, even if it meant uncovering secrets that were meant to stay buried. The sun had moved 3 hours across the Virginia sky by the time Marcus Kane made his decision. He sat in his quarters at Quantico, a sparse room that reflected the minimalist efficiency of a man who believed possessions were just weight that slowed you down. The phone lay on his desk like an unexploded ordnance, that mysterious message still glowing on the screen. "We know who you are, Ghost. Leave now or your past will destroy innocent lives." He had run the number through every database he could access without raising flags. Military intelligence systems, FBI tip lines, even a few gray area websites that existed in the murky space between legal and Class C food. Nothing. The number was a ghost itself, bouncing through proxy servers in countries that did not ask questions and did not keep records. Whoever sent this knew how to disappear. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking in protest. Outside his window, the base was settling into its evening rhythm. Marines jogging in formation, their cadence calls carrying through the warm air. The distant pop of small arms fire from the qualification ranges. The eternal soundtrack of military life, comforting in its predictability. But nothing felt predictable anymore. That shot, that impossible reality-bending shot. It played in his mind like a film loop he could not shut off. The way Elena Cross had become absolutely still, not just motionless, but transformed into something geological, something that existed outside of time. The way the rifle had spoken with a voice deeper than thunder. And that impossibly long wait, 11 seconds of breath held across the entire firing line, before the clang of metal on metal announced that human skill could still achieve what computers said was impossible. He had been trained to trust data. Numbers did not lie. Ballistic coefficients, wind vectors, temperature gradients, these were the immutable facts that governed the flight of a bullet. But Elena Cross had just proven that there was something beyond the numbers, some quality of understanding that could not be reduced to ones and zeros. And now someone was threatening her. Marcus made his choice the way he made all important choices, quickly and with full commitment. He stood, grabbed his keys, and headed for the parking lot. He had the address from the base visitor log. A small property 40 minutes west, in the foothills where Virginia started its slow climb toward the Appalachian Mountains. The drive took him through countryside that grew progressively more rural, the sprawl of military infrastructure, giving way to horse farms and patches of old-growth forest that had somehow survived the march of development. The GPS led him down a gravel road that wound through thick stands of oak and pine, the canopy overhead turning the late afternoon light into a green-gold filter that painted everything with the soft patina of memory. Elena Cross's property was exactly what Marcus expected, and nothing like it at the same time. A small farmhouse, maybe 100 years old, maintained with careful attention but no pretense. The paint was fresh but plain. The porch was swept clean but held no decorations. A garden grew with military precision, rows of vegetables arranged with the same attention to detail Elena had brought to her shooting position. Everything served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. The old pickup truck sat in the driveway, still ticking as the engine cooled. Marcus parked and sat for a moment, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say that would not sound insane? "Excuse me, ma'am, I think someone might be threatening you based on a cryptic text message I received that was clearly meant for you. And also, I need to know everything about your past because I cannot stop thinking about that shot." Before he could talk himself out of it, the front door opened. Elena stood on the porch, and Marcus realized with the start that she was holding a pistol, not pointing it at him. Just holding it with the casual competence of someone for whom firearms were tools as ordinary as hammers or screwdrivers. "You can come up, Sergeant Kane. The gun is just policy. I do not get many unannounced visitors." He climbed out of his truck, hyper-aware of every movement, keeping his hands visible. "How do you know my name?" A small smile touched her lips, the same sad smile he had seen at the range. "I know all your names, Morrison, Chen, Rodriguez. I make it a point to know who is around me when I am vulnerable." Old habits. She turned and walked into the house, leaving the door open. An invitation and a test. Marcus followed. The interior was as spare as the exterior. Hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Furniture that was functional rather than decorative. But the walls told a different story. Photographs, dozens of them, black and white images that captured moments from another era. Men and women in field gear that predated modern tactical equipment, posing with weapons that belonged in museums. And in many of the photos, younger versions of Elena, her hair dark instead of silver, her face unlined, but wearing the same expression of calm competence. Marcus stopped in front of one photograph. A group of 12 people standing in front of what looked like a C-130 transport plane. The photo quality suggested the 1980s. Everyone wore civilian clothes, but their bearing screamed military. And there, third from the left, was Elena. She could not have been more than 30, but her eyes held that same sharp awareness. "Phantom cell," she said from behind him. 1986. That was taken in West Germany, right before we deployed to Lebanon. Marcus turned. She had set the pistol on a side table, a gesture of trust that felt significant. She moved to a small kitchen that opened onto the main living space, filling a kettle with water. "I know you have questions, Sergeant." And I know you received a message meant for me. You have good instincts coming here. That probably saved both our lives. How did you? She set the kettle on the stove, struck a match to light the gas. The flame caught with a soft whoomp. Because if you had tried to trace that number through official channels, you would have triggered alerts. And the people looking for me would have known that you know. They would have made you a liability. Marcus felt ice water run through his veins. Who are they? Elena gestured to a chair at a small wooden table. Sit. This is going to take some time. He sat. She prepared tea with the same deliberate efficiency she brought to everything, measuring loose leaves into a ceramic pot, letting the water heat to exactly the right temperature. The ritual gave Marcus time to study her more carefully. In the soft light of her kitchen, he could see scars he had missed before. A thin line along her jawbone, another across the back of her left hand. The marks of a life lived in places where mistakes drew blood. The kettle whistled. She poured, and the smell of bergamot filled the small space. Phantom Cell was created in 1982, she began, settling into the chair across from him. The Cold War was heating up again after Détente fell apart. The Soviets in Afghanistan. Proxy wars in Africa and Central America. The intelligence community needed assets that could operate in denied areas, take shots that no one else could take, and disappear without a trace. She pushed a cup of tea toward him. We were recruited from the best of the best. Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, Marine Force Recon, even a few CIA paramilitary officers, 12 operators, 6 two-person teams. Each team had a shooter and a spotter. We trained for 2 years before our first deployment, learning languages, survival skills, advanced field craft, and shooting. God, the shooting. Her eyes went distant, looking at something Marcus could not see. We shot 10,000 rounds a month. Every conceivable condition. Heat, cold, rain, snow, wind, day, night, twilight. From stable positions and from positions that would make a mountain goat nervous. We learned to read terrain like books, to feel atmospheric changes in our bones, to become part of the environment so completely that we could disappear in plain sight. And David Morgan, Marcus said quietly, he was your spotter. The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Elena's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. A door opening onto grief that had been carefully locked away. David was the best spotter who ever lived. She said it simply, a statement of fact. He could read mirage at 3,000 meters and tell me wind speed to within half a mile per hour. He could estimate range by eye to within 10 meters. And he could do complex ballistic calculations in his head faster than most computers. But more than that, he understood patience. The waiting, the long hours of stillness, when your body screams at you to move, and your mind tries to convince you that the mission is not worth the discomfort. She sipped her tea. We were a team for 12 years, 47 missions, 23 countries. Some of them do not exist anymore. Some of them never existed at all, at least not on any official map. We never failed. Not once. Marcus leaned forward. What happened? Operation Nightfall, September 1991, Afghanistan, near the Pakistan border. Our target was a man named General Rashid Khalil. He was supposed to be a high-value terrorist facilitator, someone who was helping move weapons and money to extremist groups. The intelligence briefing was very specific, very detailed. Take him out, destabilize his network, save American lives. Her fingers tightened around the cup. We set up on a ridgeline overlooking his compound. The shot was 2,400 meters. Not easy, but well within our capabilities. We waited 3 days for the perfect conditions. David did his calculations, I made my adjustments, and when Khalil stepped into the courtyard, I took the shot. She set the cup down carefully. Clean kill, center mass. He was dead before he hit the ground. But, Marcus prompted, but during our 3 days of observation, David had been listening. He always carried audio surveillance equipment, just in case we picked up actionable intelligence. And he recorded something, a conversation between American officers visiting the compound. It turned out General Khalil was not a terrorist. He was a witness. To what? A war crime. A massacre of civilians in a village near Kandahar. American forces had received bad intelligence, thought they were hitting a Taliban stronghold. They were not. 43 people died. Women, children, old men. The kind of mistake that ends careers and starts congressional investigations. Khalil had seen it happen. He was preparing to go public with testimony and evidence. Marcus felt his stomach turn. So they sent you to kill him. They sent us to solve a problem. Elena's voice was flat, emotionless. We did not know. We followed orders. We trusted the intelligence. And we executed a man who was going to tell the truth. What did you do? With the recording? David wanted to go public immediately. He was furious. I had never seen him that angry, but I convinced him to wait. We were deep in hostile territory. If we broke cover to blow the whistle, we would be dead before we could get the story out. So we decided to complete the mission, extract safely, and then release the evidence through channels that could not be traced back to us. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where shadows were growing long. We packed up our gear and started moving to the extraction point. A helicopter was supposed to pick us up 30 kilometers away. But someone had other plans. They ambushed you. 8 operators, American operators. They hit us at dawn when we were most vulnerable. David saw them first. His environmental awareness saved my life. We took cover in a dry riverbed, and for 6 hours we fought. Her reflection in the window looked haunted. David was hit twice, leg and shoulder. Not fatal, but he was losing blood and mobility. We were surrounded. No way out. The extraction helicopter had been waved off, told the landing zone was compromised. We were being left to die. Marcus found he was holding his breath. David made a choice. He gave me the recording, told me to run while he laid down covering fire. I refused. We were partners. We did not leave each other. But he pulled rank. He was a sergeant. I was still a corporal then. He ordered me to go. A single tear tracks down her face, catching the light. The last thing he said was, "Live and tell the truth when it is safe." Then he stood up and drew their fire. I ran. I heard the gunshots behind me, so many gunshots, and then silence. She turned from the window, and Marcus saw the weight of 30 years in her eyes. I made it to a village, traded my gear for civilian clothes, walked across the Pakistan border, and found a CIA safe house. When I told them what happened, they locked me in a room for 3 days, interrogated me, threatened me, told me I was mistaken, that there had been no ambush, that David had been killed by Taliban fighters, that the recording I claimed to have was probably propaganda. What about the evidence? I hid it before I reached the safe house, buried it in a waterproof case in a location I could find again if I needed to, and I made it very clear that if anything happened to me, that evidence would find its way to the media. It was the only insurance policy I had. She returned to the table, moving like someone much older than she had seemed at the range. That is why someone wants me dead now. 30 years ago, I was just a threat that could be managed, watched, controlled. But something has changed. Someone is worried that I might finally release that evidence, or maybe they just want to tie up loose ends before they die of old age. Marcus processed this, his tactical mind working through the implications. The message said your past would destroy innocent lives. Because it would. She met his eyes. The officers who ordered the hit on Khalil, the ones who authorized the ambush on me and David, some of them are still alive, still serving. Some have families, grandchildren. If I release that recording after 30 years, it will not just destroy them, it will destroy everyone connected to them. So you have been silent. I have been patient. There is a difference. I am waiting for the right moment, when the people who made those decisions are dead or powerless. When the revelation can bring justice without creating collateral damage to people who had no part in it. Marcus sat back, his mind reeling. The old woman who had seemed like a harmless enthusiast at the range was actually a living bomb, carrying evidence that could bring down decorated officers and rewrite official history. And now someone was trying to defuse that bomb permanently. Who sent the message? I do not know yet, but they made a mistake contacting you. It tells me they are watching, but they do not know where the evidence is hidden. If they knew, they would have just retrieved it. They are trying to scare me into running, into making a mistake that reveals its location. So what do we do? Elena smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. You should go home, Sergeant Kane. Forget you saw that shot. Forget this conversation. Live your life. Marcus shook his head. I cannot do that. Why not? Because that shot was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And because David Morgan deserves better than to be forgotten. And because if someone is threatening you, they are threatening the only person I have met who truly understands what I have been trying to understand my whole career. The words came out in a rush, surprising even himself with their intensity. Elena studied him for a long moment, and he had the unsettling feeling of being examined at a level deeper than his words. You really want to learn? More than anything. Then come back tomorrow. Oh, 600. Wear clothes you do not mind destroying. And Sergeant Kane, she added as he stood to leave, do not tell anyone where you are going. Not your team, not your commanding officer, no one. Understood. He drove back to base as darkness settled over Virginia like a blanket, his mind spinning with everything he had learned. The story should have seemed insane, the paranoid fantasy of someone who had lived too long with classified secrets. But it fit, everything fit. The impossible skill, the haunted eyes, the way she carried herself like someone who had survived multiple attempts on her life. And the shot, that impossible shot made sense now. It was not just skill, it was memorial. It was Elena keeping her promise to David, keeping his methods alive, making sure that his voice, his way of reading the world, was not forgotten. Marcus spent a restless night planning what he would say to Morrison to explain his absence, running through cover stories, discarding them as too thin. In the end, he simply sent a text, taking personal day tomorrow. Family matter. Morrison would not like it, but he would accept it. At 05:30, Marcus was dressed in old BDS and driving through the pre-dawn darkness toward Elena's property. The world was that particular shade of blue that exists only in the hour before sunrise, when night has not quite let go, but day is already pushing at the edges. Elena was waiting on her porch, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cool air. She wore the same field jacket and jeans from the day before, but she had added a gear belt that looked like it had served in multiple wars. The coffee was black and strong enough to strip paint, exactly what Marcus needed. First lesson, she said without preamble, forget everything you think you know about shooting. Marcus blinked. Everything? The computers, the calculators, the apps that tell you what the wind is doing 500 meters downrange. All of it. Today you learned to read the world the way David taught me. She led him away from the house, into the woods that climbed the hillside behind her property. They walked for 20 minutes, Elena moving through the forest with a silence that seemed impossible. Every step was placed with care, every branch avoided before it could snap, every patch of dry leaves skirted around. Marcus, despite his training, sounded like a marching band by comparison. The woods opened onto a small clearing with a natural bench of rock that overlooked a valley. The view stretched for miles, layers of ridges fading into blue distance. Sit, Elena said. We are going to watch the sunrise. That is it? That is everything. They sat. Marcus fidgeted for the first few minutes, his body conditioned to constant activity, his mind racing with questions. But Elena's stillness was infectious. Gradually, he found himself settling, his breathing slowing, his awareness expanding beyond the confines of his own thoughts. The sun rose with the slow drama of all natural phenomena, painting the sky in shades that no human art could replicate. And as it rose, the world came alive. A breeze stirred the valley, and Marcus saw for the first time how it moved in patterns, not random but structured, flowing around the ridges like water around stones. What do you see? Elena asked softly. Wind, Marcus said, moving west to east. Deeper. What do you see? He focused. The breeze was not uniform. It moved in layers, the upper air flowing one direction, while the surface wind followed the contours of the land. Where the valley narrowed, the wind accelerated. Where it widened, the wind slowed and swirled. Layers, he said. Different speeds at different heights. Good. Now feel it on your face. Do not just see it. Feel it. Marcus closed his eyes and turned his face to the breeze. At first, there was just the sensation of air moving across his skin. But as he focused, he began to notice variations. Gentle pulses, shifts in pressure. It was not constant, it breathed. They sat there for 2 hours, watching the sun climb, feeling the air change as the land heated unevenly, as thermals began to rise from the valley floor, as the simple act of observation became a meditation that stripped away assumptions and revealed the world's complexity. This is what David taught me first, Elena said as they finally stood. Not how to shoot, but how to see. A bullet is just a piece of metal. The skill is not in making it go where you want. The skill is in understanding where it wants to go and aligning your intent with the world's reality. They returned to the house, and Elena led him to a small range set up behind the barn. It was nothing like the high-tech facilities at Quantico. Just a simple backstop made of stacked earth, with targets at various distances marked by weathered stakes. She handed him her rifle, the massive Nightfall. Up close, it was even more impressive. The weight was substantial but perfectly balanced. The stock fit his shoulder like it had been carved for him, though he knew that was impossible. The scope, that ancient brass tube, was surprisingly clear, the glass ground with a precision that modern manufacturing had not improved upon so much as automated. Do not use the scope yet, Elena said. I want you to estimate the range to that target. She pointed to a stake maybe 600 meters out, marked with a piece of white cloth. Marcus studied it using techniques he had learned in sniper school. Reference points, angular measurements, the way objects appeared at known distances. 650, he said with confidence. Elena shook her head. 580. He frowned. I am pretty sure. She handed him a laser rangefinder. He checked. 579 meters. How did you... I have walked this land 10,000 times. I know every tree, every rock, every fold in the ground. I know how they look at dawn and at dusk, in summer and winter, in clear air and in fog. The range is not a number to be measured. It is a relationship to be understood. She took the rifle back. Watch. She settled into a shooting position, and Marcus saw now what he had missed at Quantico. Her body did not just lie down on the ground. It became part of it. Her breathing synchronized with the subtle rise and fall of the earth itself. Her finger on the trigger was so gentle, it seemed to be asking permission rather than giving commands. The rifle spoke once, that deep, resonant boom. 600 meters downrange, the white cloth disintegrated. She stood, ejected the massive brass case, and handed the rifle back to Marcus. Your turn. He tried to replicate her position, her stillness, the way she had seemed to sink into the earth. But he could feel the wrongness of it, the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands that he had never noticed before. You are fighting the rifle, Elena said. It wants to settle. Let it. Marcus took a breath, tried to relax, and pressed the trigger. The recoil was massive, even braced for it. The rifle bucked hard enough to hurt his shoulder, and when he looked downrange, there was no mark on or near the target. Elena handed him binoculars. Look at the berm behind the target. He glassed the area and found his impact point. 2 feet high, 3 feet right. The wind pushed you, she said, but you also flinched, anticipating the recoil, fighting the rifle instead of working with it. They spent the next 4 hours shooting. Not quickly, not with the volume he was used to in training. Elena limited him to 5 shots per hour, making him think about each one, dissect each failure, understand each success. It was the slowest, most frustrating, most enlightening shooting session of his life. Between strings, she told him stories about missions that had no names, about shots taken from positions that defied belief, about the peculiar intimacy that developed between spotter and shooter, a bond deeper than friendship, built on absolute trust and shared survival. And she told him about David. He was from Montana, she said as they sat in the shade, letting the rifle cool. Grew up hunting elk in the mountains. His father was an outfitter, took rich city folk into the backcountry, and taught them how to not shoot themselves. David learned to shoot at 6 years old. By 15, he could hit running deer at 400 yards with open sights. She smiled at the memory, but he was gentle. That is what people never understood. You would look at him, this big, tough Delta Force operator, and think he was hard all the way through. But he cried during movies. He wrote poetry, terrible poetry, but he tried. He believed in things, honor, duty, doing the right thing even when it cost you. That is why he recorded the conversation, Marcus said, about the massacre. That is why he died, because he believed the truth mattered more than orders, more than his own life. The sun was setting when Elena finally called the training session complete. Marcus's shoulder was bruised, his pride was battered, but something had shifted in his understanding. He could feel it, a crack in the certainty he had built his worldview upon. Same time tomorrow, she asked. He nodded, then hesitated. Why are you doing this? Teaching me. Because David never got the chance to teach anyone else. Because his knowledge should not die with me. And because, Sergeant Kane, you remind me of him. Young, confident, sure that you have all the answers, but curious enough to know you do not. Marcus drove back to base as darkness fell, his mind full of new questions. He parked in the lot near his barracks and sat for a moment, processing the day, trying to organize his thoughts into something coherent. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. different from the first, but the message made his blood run cold. We know you were there. We know she is teaching you. Stop now or you both die. There will be no warning, no second chance. Marcus stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Someone was watching them. Someone had tracked him to Elena's property, had observed their training session, had decided he was now a liability. He forwarded the message to Elena's number, which she had given him that morning. Her reply came back almost immediately. Do not come tomorrow. Too dangerous. He typed back, I am coming. Her response was 3 words. Then we adapt. Marcus lay in his rack that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the barracks around him. Snoring, someone watching a video on their phone with the volume too loud, the distant thump of music from the rec room. Normal sounds? A normal night on a Marine Corps base. But nothing was normal anymore. He had stumbled into a war that had been fought in shadows for 30 years. A war between truth and expedience, between honor and political convenience. And he had just chosen sides, probably signed his own death warrant, all for a chance to learn from a woman who could make bullets defy physics and gravity and time itself. The question was not why he had made that choice. The question was what came next. And in the darkness of his room, with threats from unknown enemies and the promise of knowledge that could reshape everything he thought he knew about his craft, Marcus Kane smiled. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly afraid. And it felt exactly right. Dawn broke over Virginia with the colors of a fresh bruise, purple and gold spreading across a sky that promised rain before noon. Marcus Kane stood in Elena Cross's kitchen, watching her prepare coffee with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. But this morning, there was something different in her movements. A tightness, an awareness that went beyond her usual vigilance. The second threat had changed the equation. Someone was not just watching from a distance anymore. They were close enough to track Marcus's movements, to know he had spent hours at Elena's property, to understand that knowledge was being transferred between them. That made them both immediate targets rather than theoretical problems to be solved later. We need to know who is behind this, Marcus said, accepting the cup she offered. We cannot fight shadows. Elena moved to the window, her eyes scanning the tree line with systematic thoroughness. In the old days, we would have called this a double blind. You create a threat to flush out the person trying to stay hidden. But that only works if you are willing to become bait. I am willing. She turned, and her pale blue eyes studied him with an intensity that felt like a physical examination. You do not understand what you are offering. These people, whoever they are, they have resources, training, authorization to operate outside normal constraints. If we push, they will not arrest us. They will not try to scare us. They will simply eliminate the problem. Marcus set his cup down carefully. Then we pushed carefully, intelligently. We use the fact that they think they are hunting us when really we are hunting them. A small smile touched Elena's lips. David would have liked you. He was always trying to turn defense into offense. It got him killed, but he would have liked you. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt ice water replace the blood in his veins. The message was from Sergeant Jake Morrison, his team lead at Quantico. Kane, need you back on base ASAP. Colonel Brennan wants to see you. Formal summons. Do not be late. Marcus showed Elena the message. She read it twice, her expression darkening. They are moving faster than I expected. Summoning you officially means they want everything documented. They are building a paper trail. For what? To justify whatever happens next. If you disappear, there will be records showing you were called to a meeting. Witnesses who saw you leave. A timeline that exonerates them and implicates someone else. Standard operational security for deniable actions. Marcus felt his tactical mind shift into high gear, running scenarios, calculating probabilities. So I do not go. No, you go, but you go prepared. She moved to a closet and pulled out a small device that looked like it belonged in a spy thriller from the 80s. A digital recorder, compact enough to hide in a pocket. You record everything, every word, every person you see. If they are building a narrative, we build our own. And if they search me, they will not. Not yet. That would show their hand too, obviously. Right now, they are still trying to appear legitimate. Use that. Marcus took the recorder, felt its weight in his palm. The plastic was worn smooth from use, and he wondered how many conversations it had captured, how many secrets it held. What if Brennan is not involved? What if this is exactly what it seems, just a routine meeting? Then we waste a battery and you get lectured for taking an unauthorized personal day. But Marcus, she stepped closer and he could smell gun oil and coffee and something else. Something that reminded him of old libraries and stored memories. If it is not routine, if they try to isolate you or move you somewhere private, you walk away. Consequences be damned. Your career is not worth your life. He nodded, pocketed the recorder, and headed for the door. Elena's voice stopped him. Sergeant Kane, Marcus. He turned. David used to say that the most dangerous moment in any operation is when you think you understand what is happening. That is when they have you. Stay uncertain. Stay ready. I will. The drive back to Quantico took 30 minutes through countryside that looked peaceful and ordinary. Farmers tending fields. Morning commuters heading to offices. The normal machinery of American life grinding forward with reassuring predictability. But Marcus could not shake the feeling that he was driving towards something that would strip away that normalcy forever, that would reveal the machinery beneath the machinery, the gears that turned in darkness and made decisions that never appeared in newspapers or history books. Colonel Sarah Brennan's office was in the administration building, a brick structure that dated back to World War II and had been maintained with the Corps' typical attention to preserving anything that held tradition. Marcus had only been there twice before, both times for awards ceremonies. Brennan was a legend in the sniper community, a former Marine Scout sniper instructor who had served 3 combat deployments and earned a Silver Star for actions she never discussed in public. He knocked at 0900 exactly, military precision ingrained in every movement. Enter. The office was larger than Marcus expected, with windows that looked out over the parade ground. Brennan sat behind a desk that showed decades of use, its surface scarred by countless briefings and decisions. She was 52 but looked younger, her hair still more brown than gray, her frame lean and hard from a lifetime of discipline. She wore utilities without any of the usual clutter of awards and qualification badges. Just name tape and rank, a warrior's simplicity. But it was the other man in the room who made Marcus's instincts scream danger. He stood by the window, backlit by morning sun so his features were in shadow. Medium height, medium build, the kind of physical presence that was designed to be forgotten 5 minutes after you saw it. He wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, and a button-down shirt that could have come from any department store. No jewelry, no watch, nothing distinctive. But he moved wrong. When he turned to face Marcus, his weight shifted with the economy of someone who had spent years learning how to hurt people efficiently. Military, definitely, but not regular military. Something else. Sergeant Kane, Brennan said, her voice neutral, but carrying an edge Marcus had not heard before. Thank you for coming on short notice. Please sit. Marcus sat, hyper-aware of the recorder in his pocket, praying it was actually recording. That the batteries Elena had sworn were fresh would last, that this ancient piece of technology would work when everything might depend on it. This is Captain James Hartford, Brennan continued, gesturing to the man by the window. He is with the Defense Intelligence Agency, assigned to internal security reviews. Hartford moved forward, and for the first time, Marcus could see his face clearly. 45, maybe 50, handsome in a generic way that seemed almost artificial. But his eyes were cold, the pale gray of winter ice, and they tracked Marcus with the focused attention of a predator assessing prey. Sergeant Kane, Hartford said, his voice smooth and cultured, the accent suggesting expensive schools and careful diction. I appreciate you taking time from your training schedule. I know your time is valuable. Sir, I understand you have become acquainted with a civilian who uses our extreme long-range facilities. A Ms. Elena Cross. Yes, sir. She was at the range 2 days ago. Hartford smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Remarkable woman. That shot she made, quite extraordinary. In fact, I would say impossible, except we have multiple witnesses who confirm it happened. It happened, sir. I saw it myself. Hartford began to pace, a slow circuit around the office that felt choreographed, designed to create unease. Tell me, Sergeant, what do you know about Ms. Cross's background? Just what she has told me, sir, that she used to shoot competitively, that she learned from military instructors. Marcus kept his answers vague, incomplete, the minimum required by the question. Did she mention her military service? She said she had trained with military personnel, sir. Not that she had served. A slight exaggeration, but one that protected Elena's operational history. Hartford stopped pacing and turned to face Marcus directly. That is interesting because we have no record of Elena Cross receiving any formal training from military instructors. In fact, we have very few records of Elena Cross at all prior to 1992. It is almost as if she did not exist before then. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus kept his expression neutral, his breathing steady, giving nothing away. People do not just appear out of nowhere, Sergeant. They have histories, backgrounds, paper trails. The absence of those things suggests someone is hiding something, or someone has had their history erased. Brennan shifted in her chair, and Marcus caught the movement in his peripheral vision. She was uncomfortable. This was not going the way she had expected. Captain Hartford, I am not sure what Sergeant Kane can tell you that would be useful. He met Ms. Cross professionally at a military facility under supervision. I do not see the relevance. Hartford turned his cold eyes on Brennan. The relevance, Colonel, is that Elena Cross may be a security risk, and anyone who associates with her may be compromised. I am trying to determine if Sergeant Kane has been exposed to anything that would affect his reliability or his clearance status. Marcus felt anger kindle in his chest, a slow burn that he forced himself to control. With all due respect, sir, I have not been compromised. I watched a civilian make a difficult shot, was impressed by her skill, and answered her questions about modern equipment versus older methods. That is the extent of our interaction. The lie came smoothly, practiced during the drive back to base. It was close enough to truth that it would be hard to disprove, vague enough that it created no specific claims that could be checked. Hartford studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling of being read at a level deeper than his words. Then Hartford reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. He placed it on Brennan's desk, facing Marcus. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed Marcus walking into Elena's farmhouse, two figures visible through the window. You were at her residence yesterday, Sergeant? For approximately 6 hours. That seems like more than a casual conversation about equipment. Marcus felt his heart rate spike but kept his breathing steady, his expression calm. She offered to teach me some older techniques, sir. Wine reading without instruments, range estimation by eye, skills that modern technology has made less necessary, but that some old-timers still value. I thought it would make me a better instructor when I rotate into that billet. The explanation was plausible, even reasonable, but Hartford's expression did not change. Did she discuss her past with you? Any missions, operations, or activities she may have participated in? No, sir. Just shooting techniques. Did she give you anything? Documents, recordings, data storage devices? No, sir. Did she mention anyone else? Names of other people she may have served with? No, sir. Hartford collected the photograph and returned it to his pocket. Then he moved to the window, staring out at the parade ground where Marines ran through morning PT in perfect formation. Let me be very clear, Sergeant Kane. Elena Cross is a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. The nature of that investigation is classified, but I can tell you that association with her could have serious consequences for your career and your freedom. I am strongly advising you to cease all contact with her immediately. And if she contacts me, sir, you report it to me directly, not through your chain of command, not to Colonel Brennan, to me. Hartford turned, and his eyes were chips of ice. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. Hartford moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. If you are contacted by anyone claiming to represent the Inspector General's office, or the Criminal Investigation Division, or any oversight body, you will inform me immediately before you speak with them. This investigation has national security implications. Compartmentalization is essential. He left without waiting for a response, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded too final. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Brennan stood and moved to the window, her back to Marcus, her shoulders rigid with tension. That man is lying, she said quietly. About what, I do not know. But I have been doing this long enough to recognize when someone is running an unauthorized operation. Ma'am, Marcus ventured carefully, what do you know about Elena Cross? Brennan was silent for a longer moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of classified knowledge and the burden of secrets that could never be fully shared. I know that she is one of the most highly decorated operators who never officially existed. I know that she served in places that do not appear on maps and conducted operations that will never be declassified. And I know that 30 years ago, something happened that made powerful people very nervous. Something that has never been resolved. She turned to face him. I also know that James Hartford's father was a major in Army intelligence in the early 90s, and that he died under suspicious circumstances in 1993, just 2 years after Elena Cross supposedly retired from service. The official story was a training accident, but there were rumors, whispers that he had been involved in cleaning up a botched operation in Afghanistan. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place, a pattern emerging from chaos. Operation Nightfall. I did not say that, Brennan said sharply, and you did not hear it from me. But Sergeant Kane, if you are involved in something, if Elena Cross has drawn you into whatever vendetta or crusade she is pursuing, you need to be very careful. Because the people on the other side of this equation have resources and authority that can make people disappear. She moved to her desk, picked up a pen, and wrote something on a notepad. Then she tore off the page and handed it to Marcus. It was a phone number, nothing else. That is my personal cell, not my duty phone. If you need help, if things go sideways, you call that number. Day or night, I may not be able to stop what is coming, but I can at least make sure people know you existed. Marcus took the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his wallet. Thank you, ma'am. Dismissed. He walked out of the building into morning sunshine that felt surreal after the shadows of Brennan's office. His hands were shaking, adrenaline finally breaking through the control he had maintained during the interview. He sat in his truck and replayed the conversation in his mind, looking for traps, for things he had said wrong, for tells he might have given that would reveal his connection to Elena was deeper than he had admitted. The recorder in his pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds. He drove away from Quantico, not toward Elena's property, but to a rest stop 30 miles north. He parked in a corner of the lot, away from other vehicles, and pulled out the recorder. The LED showed it had been running the entire time. He rewound and played back Hartford's voice, tinny but clear through the small speaker. Elena Cross is a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. He stopped the playback, his mind working through implications. Hartford had not denied knowing about Operation Nightfall, had not acted surprised when Marcus mentioned old techniques and training. He had been fishing, trying to determine what Elena had shared, what evidence might exist, where it might be hidden. And the warning about not talking to oversight bodies. That was not standard procedure. That was someone trying to maintain control of information, to prevent outside agencies from learning about an operation that had gone wrong decades ago. Marcus made his decision. He pulled out his personal laptop, connected to his phone's hotspot to avoid any base network, and began to research. James Hartford was not a common name. And if his father had been involved in military intelligence in the early 90s, there would be records, obituaries, service records, something. It took 2 hours of careful searching, moving through archived newspaper databases and military history forms, before he found it. Major John Hartford, age 47, killed in a training accident at Fort Bragg in April 1993, survived by his wife Margaret and his son James, age 15. The obituary was brief, almost perfunctory, no details about the accident, no mention of his specific duties or assignments, just the bare facts of a life ended and a family left behind. But in the comments section of a military history forum, posted 8 years ago by a user who had since deleted their account, Marcus found something else, a question that had never been answered. Anyone remember the rumors about Major Hartford's death? Word was he got mixed up in something in Afghanistan, some op that went bad, and they disappeared him to keep it quiet. Training accident, my ass. He knew something someone wanted buried. The post had 3 replies, all deleted, their content lost to time. But the question remained, hanging in digital space like a ghost refusing to rest. Marcus closed the laptop and sat staring through the windshield at nothing, his mind assembling a picture that was becoming clearer and more terrifying with every piece that fell into place. John Hartford had been involved in Operation Nightfall, had possibly been one of the officers who ordered the hit on General Carliel, had maybe even commanded the team that ambushed Elena and David. And when Elena survived, when she disappeared with evidence that could destroy careers and reputations, Major Hartford had become a liability. Someone who knew too much. Someone who might talk. So they had eliminated him, made it look like an accident, cleaned up their mess. And his son James had grown up knowing his father died under suspicious circumstances, had probably spent his entire career in intelligence trying to find out why. trying to uncover the truth. But what if James had found the truth? What if he had discovered that his father had been killed to cover up a war crime, to protect the officers who had ordered an assassination of a witness, who had authorized an ambush of American operators who threatened to expose them? How would that knowledge change a man? Would it make him seek justice? Or would it make him seek revenge against everyone involved, including the woman who had survived when his father had not? Marcus started his truck and headed back toward Elena's property, driving faster than he should, his mind racing ahead of his vehicle. He needed to tell her what he had learned, needed to warn her that Hartford was not just some bureaucrat trying to tie up loose ends. He was personal. He was motivated by 30 years of grief and anger, and he would not stop until he had answers or revenge or both. The gravel road to Elena's farmhouse seemed longer than before, the trees pressing closer, shadows darker despite the midday sun. Marcus parked and was halfway to the porch when he saw it. The front door was open, not standing wide, but ajar, just enough to be wrong. Elena never left doors open. He drew his sidearm, a Sig Sauer M18 that he was authorized to carry off duty, and approached the house with all the tactical training he had absorbed over 6 years in the Marines. Slicing the pie at the door, checking corners, moving with silence and speed. The interior was undisturbed, nothing obviously out of place. But something felt wrong. The air was different. Someone had been here recently. Someone who did not belong. "Elena," he called out. No response. He cleared the first floor room by room, then moved upstairs. The bedroom was empty. The bathroom was empty. He came back down and checked the kitchen. And that was when he saw it. A single photograph placed carefully on the kitchen table where Elena drank her morning coffee. The image showed a young man, maybe 25, wearing army fatigues and standing in front of a desert landscape that could only be Afghanistan. He had Elena's eyes, the same pale blue, the same sharp awareness. Marcus picked up the photograph and saw writing on the back, clean, precise handwriting that looked like it had been done with a fountain pen. Jacob Morgan, son of David and Sarah Morgan, born March 15, 1992, current location classified. Message: she took my father, I want answers. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. David Morgan had a son who would be 32 now, a son who had grown up without a father because of Operation Nightfall, a son who had apparently joined the military, probably seeking to understand the legacy of a man he had never really known. And someone had told him that Elena was responsible for his father's death. The front door opened behind him and Marcus spun, weapon coming up automatically. Elena stood in the doorway, her hands raised, her face pale. "I see you found it," she said quietly. "They left it while I was checking the perimeter. Whoever placed it was good. I never saw them." Marcus lowered the weapon. Jacob Morgan, David's son. Elena moved into the room like she was walking through water, each step requiring conscious effort. "I did not know Sarah was pregnant when we deployed. David never told me. Maybe he did not know. Maybe she did not tell him. But after he died, she moved away, changed her name, disappeared into the civilian world. And now someone has told Jacob that you killed his father." Elena took the photograph from Marcus's hands, staring at the young face that must have reminded her of ghosts and guilt and grief that had never fully healed. "Not that I killed him, that I got him killed, that I survived when he did not, that I have been living free while he has been dead for 33 years, all of which is true. That is not true. He made a choice. He chose to save you. But I let him. I ran when he told me to run. I chose my life over his, and every day since, I have lived with that choice." She set the photograph down, and when she looked up, Marcus saw tears tracking down her weathered face. The first emotion he had seen break through her control since he had met her. "Hartford is using Jacob. He found him, told him a version of the truth designed to turn him against me, and now he has a weapon that I cannot fight. Because how do I defend myself against David's son? How do I explain that his father died so I could keep a secret that I have never revealed?" Marcus moved to the window, watching the tree line, watching for movement or surveillance or the next piece of this nightmare to reveal itself. "We need to get ahead of this. Figure out Hartford's endgame. Because he is not just after the evidence. He is building something. A scenario where you are eliminated and it looks justified." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was different, harder, the voice of an operator making tactical decisions. "Then we give him what he wants. We let him think he is getting the evidence. We set a meet, and we turn his trap into ours. Marcus turned to look at her. You want to use the evidence as bait. I want to end this. 33 years I have been running, hiding, waiting for the right moment. But there is never going to be a right moment. There are just moments. And this one, right now, with David's son being used as a weapon against me, this might be the only chance I get to make his death mean something. What about Jacob? If he is part of Hartford's team, if he is coming after you, then I will have to convince him of the truth. Or die trying. Either way, this ends. She moved to the closet and pulled out a small backpack that looked like it had traveled through multiple wars. Inside was a waterproof case, sealed with wow and tape, covered in dust that suggested it had not been opened in years. This is it. The recording David made, the evidence of the massacre, the proof that Operation Nightfall was not what we were told. Every word, every name, every detail that could bring down the people who ordered him killed. She held it for a moment, and Marcus could see the weight of it in her hands, heavier than metal and plastic, weighted with years of grief and responsibility and the terrible burden of truth. If we do this, there is no going back. People will die. Careers will end. Families will be destroyed. Are you ready for that, Sergeant Kane? Marcus thought about David Morgan, a man he had never met but felt he knew intimately through Elena's stories. A man who believed truth mattered more than his own life. A man who had saved the woman who stood before him now, had given her decades more of living, all so she could do what he could not. Tell the truth when it is safe. But safe was a myth. Safety was an illusion. There was only right action and wrong action, and the courage to choose between them. I am ready, Marcus said. Elena nodded once, then pulled out her phone. She typed a message, her fingers moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that words could be weapons or shields depending on how they were arranged. She showed Marcus the screen. The message was addressed to a number he did not recognize. Captain Hartford, I have the evidence you are looking for. I am ready to negotiate terms. Let us end this the way it should have ended 33 years ago. Face to face. Tomorrow, Quantico Range. 1400 hours. Come alone and bring Jacob Morgan. He deserves to know the truth about his father. You are not actually going to give him the evidence, Marcus said. No, but he does not know that. And in the time between now and then, we are going to prepare for the last stand David and I never got to make. She hit send, and the message disappeared into the digital ether, carrying with it the weight of decades and the promise of violence to come. Marcus watched her pocket the phone, watched her move to the weapons locker with purpose and determination, and realized that he had just committed to a course of action that would likely end his career, might end his life, and would certainly change everything he thought he understood about honor and duty and the price of truth. But for the first time since he had watched that impossible shot arc across 3 miles of Virginia sky, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. The storm was coming, and they would meet it standing. The night before the confrontation, Elena Cross did not sleep. She sat in her kitchen with the lights off, the rifle Nightfall disassembled on the table before her, each component cleaned and inspected with the ritualistic attention of a priest preparing for ceremony. The brass scope gleamed in the moonlight filtering through the window. The walnut stock showed every scar and mark from 30 years of service, a topographic map of missions and memories. Marcus had wanted to stay, to keep watch, to stand guard against whatever might come in the darkness. But Elena had sent him away. Some preparations needed to be made alone. Some conversations needed to be held with ghosts who would not speak in the presence of strangers. She ran a cloth along the barrel, feeling the microscopic imperfections that only decades of firing could create. The subtle wearing that actually improved accuracy by creating a bore so precisely matched to her ammunition that bullet and barrel had become a single system. David had taught her this, the maintenance ritual, the meditative state that came from caring for your weapon with the same attention you gave to your own body. The rifle was not just a tool, it was a promise, a memorial, a voice that spoke for a man who could not speak for himself. Tomorrow, that voice would speak one final time. She reassembled the rifle as the moon tracked across the sky, her movements automatic, hands knowing the sequence so well that thought became unnecessary. Click. The bolt slid home. Snap. The scope locked into its rings. Press. The magazine seated with mechanical certainty. When the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Elena stood and walked to the small bedroom that she had kept locked since Marcus started visiting. She opened the door for the first time in 3 years. The room was a shrine, not to religion, but to memory. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps, all connected by red string in a web that would have looked insane to anyone who did not understand what they were seeing. It was the complete history of Operation Nightfall, reconstructed from memory, from classified documents she should never have accessed, from years of patient research and careful investigation. Every person involved, every decision point, every moment where truth had diverged from official narrative. And at the center, like a spider at the heart of its web, was a photograph of Major John Hartford, taken in 1991, standing with 3 other officers in front of a command tent in Afghanistan. Elena had spent 15 years building this map, tracking the people who had ordered David's death, watching as they climbed the ranks, or retired with honor or died in their sleep, surrounded by families who believed them to be heroes. She had watched and waited and gathered evidence with the patience of someone who understood that justice delayed was not justice denied, just justice deferred until the moment was right. That moment was now. She took photographs of the entire wall with her phone, backup evidence in case Hartford managed to destroy the original. Then she carefully removed the center photograph of John Hartford and slipped it into her pocket. She would need it today, would need to show his son what his father really was. The drive to Quantico took 40 minutes through morning traffic, families heading to school and work, the ordinary machinery of Thursday life grinding forward without awareness that something extraordinary was about to unfold on a firing range where young Marines trained for distant wars. Elena drove the old pickup truck with the same steady competence she brought to everything. Never speeding, never drawing attention, just another civilian heading onto a military base with proper credentials and authorized access. Marcus was waiting at the range entrance, his face drawn from a night of no sleep and too much coffee. He wore his utilities but no gear, no body armor, no tactical vest. Elena had insisted. They were not going into this looking like they expected a fight, even though they both knew a fight was exactly what was coming. "She is not here yet," Marcus said as Elena climbed out of the truck. "I swept the range twice. No surveillance that I could find, no hidden positions. If Hartford is setting an ambush, he is being subtle about it." "He will not ambush us here," Elena said, pulling the rifle case from the truck bed. "Too public, too many potential witnesses. Whatever he is planning, it will look legitimate until the moment it is not." "And Jacob?" Marcus shook his head. "No sign, but if Hartford is using him as a weapon, he will bring it him. Will want me to see David's son pull the trigger. Maximum psychological impact." They walked to firing point 7, the same position Elena had used for her impossible shot 3 days ago. 3 days that felt like 3 years, a compressed lifetime of revelation and threat, and the slow unveiling of conspiracies that had festered in darkness for 3 decades. Elena set up her position with the same methodical precision, laying out the shooting mat, placing the rifle, checking the scope one final time. But today, she added something new. A laptop computer, small and ruggedized, the kind used by forward-deployed units for satellite communications. She placed it carefully beside the rifle and connected a cable to the waterproof case that held David's recording. "Insurance," she told Marcus. "If this goes wrong, if Hartford manages to kill us both, this computer is set to automatically upload the evidence to 40 different servers in 12 different countries. News agencies, congressional oversight committees, the International Criminal Court, everyone who needs to see it." Marcus stared at the setup, understanding dawning. You were never going to trade the evidence. This was always about forcing Hartford to show his hand. "I am old, Marcus, 65. I have lived 33 years longer than David did. 33 years of borrowed time. If today is when that debt comes due, so be it. But I will not let his death be meaningless. I will not let the truth die with me." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching made them both turn. 3 black SUVs, government plates, driving in tight formation. They parked at the far end of the range, and men began emerging. 6 of them, all wearing civilian clothes that fit too perfectly, moved too carefully, screamed covert operations in every gesture and stance. And in the middle of them, 2 figures. Captain James Hartford, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like he was heading to a golf course. his pale eyes hidden behind sunglasses that reflected the morning sun. And beside him, younger, harder, carrying it himself with the controlled violence of a man who had been trained to kill and had done it enough times that it no longer required thought. Jacob Morgan. He was 32 but looked older, his face weathered by deployments to places that aged men faster than time alone could account for. He had his father's build, compact and powerful, built for endurance rather than speed. But he had his mother's dark hair and his father's pale blue eyes, Elena's eyes, a genetic echo that made her chest tighten with grief and guilt. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, but the way he moved suggested body armor underneath, and the bulge at his waistband spoke of a concealed weapon worn with the familiarity of daily carry. His eyes swept the range with tactical precision, cataloging fields of fire, cover positions, escape routes. The automatic assessment of an operator who had survived by seeing threats before they materialized. "Ms. Cross," Hartford called out, his voice carrying across the distance with practiced projection. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I believe we can resolve the situation without further unpleasantness." He walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty, the universal gesture of peaceful intent. But his team did not follow. They spread out in a loose perimeter, taking positions that looked casual, but created interlocking fields of observation and fire. Standard close protection formations. Standard for when you expected violence. Jacob walked beside Hartford, and as they approached, Elena could see his face more clearly. The resemblance to David was heartbreaking. The same set to his jaw, the same way he held his shoulders, even the same slight cant to his head when he was assessing a situation. Genetic memory made manifest. 20 feet away, Hartford stopped. Jacob stopped beside him, his eyes locked on Elena with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "You look like him," Elena said quietly, her first words directed not to Hartford, but to the son of the man she had loved like a brother. "You have his eyes, his bearing. David would have been proud of the man you became." Jacob's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, maybe, or the first crack in whatever story Hartford had fed him. "Do not speak to him," Hartford said sharply. "You lost that right when you got his father killed." Elena's hands remained still, resting on the rifle that lay between them, like a promise or a threat depending on perspective. "I did not get David killed. I survived because he chose to save me. There is a difference." Hartford pulled a photograph from his pocket and held it up. The same image Elena had found on her kitchen table. Jacob in his army fatigues, young and hard and certain. That is what you took from him. His father, the man who should have taught him how to be a soldier, how to be a man. You took all of that. Jacob spoke for the first time, his voice rough like he was not used to using it, like he spent most of his time in silence. She was his spotter, his partner. They were supposed to protect each other. "We did protect each other," Elena said. "For 12 years, 47 missions. We never failed. We never left each other behind. Until the day when staying together meant we both died. David made a choice. He chose the mission over himself. He chose to make sure the evidence of what we discovered survived even if he did not." "What evidence?" Jacob's question came fast, sharp, the interrogator's instinct to seize on new information. Hartford moved to cut her off, but Elena spoke over him, her voice carrying the weight of decades of silence, finally broken. "Evidence that Operation Nightfall was not what we were told. That the man we killed was not a terrorist, but a witness to an American war crime. That your father recorded proof of that crime and died trying to get it out. Died protecting me so I could complete what he started." She reached slowly into her pocket, telegraphing the movement, and pulled out the photograph of Major John Hartford. She held it up so Jacob could see. And evidence that this man, Captain Hartford's father, was one of the officers who ordered the ambush that killed David, who sent 8 operators to eliminate 2 of their own because we threatened to expose the truth. Jacob turned to look at Hartford, and the question in his eyes was clear even without words. Hartford's face remained impassive, but a muscle jumped in his jaw, a tell that Elena had been trained to recognize. The first crack in his armor. "My father was a patriot," Hartford said, each word carefully controlled. "He served his country for 25 years. He died in a training accident 2 years after your supposed operation. If he was involved in anything classified, it was because he was following orders. protecting national security. He was protecting his career, Elena countered, and the careers of the men who ordered the massacre. And when I survived, when I disappeared with the evidence, your father became a liability. Someone who knew too much. Someone who might talk if the pressure got too great. Hartford's hand moved toward his waistband, a slight shift that Marcus caught immediately. Marcus's own hand moved to his concealed weapon, a silent standoff developing in the space between words. So they killed him too, Elena continued, made it look like an accident, just like they tried to make David's death look like Taliban action. Just like they are going to try to make our deaths look like something other than murder to hide the truth. You have no proof of any of this, Hartford said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. You have stories, conspiracy theories, the delusions of someone who has lived in hiding for so long that you have lost touch with reality. Elena gestured to the laptop beside her rifle. I have David's recording, every word of the conversation between the officers who ordered the massacre, every name, every detail. And in approximately 90 minutes, if I do not enter a code, that recording uploads to servers around the world. The truth comes out. Your father's name becomes synonymous with war crimes. Your career ends. The legacy you have spent your life trying to protect dies in sunlight. Hartford's composure cracked like ice under pressure. His hand completed its movement to his waistband, and suddenly he was holding a pistol, a compact Glock 19 that had been hidden under his shirt. The 6 operators who had spread out in a perimeter began moving inward, hands going to their own weapons, the careful choreography of violence about to unfold. Marcus drew his M18, bringing it up in a smooth arc that ended with the barrel pointed at Hartford's center mass. The standoff crystallized, everyone frozen in a moment of mutual threat where the next movement could trigger violence that would leave multiple people dead. But it was Jacob who broke the tableau. He stepped forward, moving between Hartford and Elena, his hands held out in a gesture that demanded pause. Wait, he said, and there was something in his voice that stopped Hartford's finger on the trigger. Just wait. He turned to Elena, and up close, the resemblance to David was even more striking. Not just physical features, but something deeper. The quality of his attention, the way he held himself in stillness that was ready to explode into action. You said you have a recording. Proof, I want to hear it. Hartford started to object, but Jacob spoke over him without turning, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. 32 years I have lived without knowing my father. My mother never talked about him, said it was too painful, said he died a hero in a classified operation, and that was all I needed to know. But I joined the army trying to understand him, trying to become worthy of a man I never met. And now you are telling me everything I believed was a lie. His voice cracked on the last word, emotion breaking through the operator's control. I deserve to know the truth. Whatever it is, however much it hurts, I deserve that. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, and Marcus saw something pass between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The shared burden of carrying David Morgan's memory. She reached for the laptop, and Hartford's gun tracked the movement. If you touch that computer, I will shoot you, Hartford said, and there was no bluff in his voice. This is your last warning. Elena's hand stopped an inch from the keyboard. She looked at Hartford, and in her eyes was something Marcus had never seen before. Not fear, not anger, pity. James, she said, and the use of his first name seemed to surprise him. Your father was not a monster. He was a soldier who made bad choices in bad situations. He followed orders that should never have been given. And when those orders led to consequences he could not live with, he was eliminated by the same system that had used him. You do not get to tell me about my father. Then let me tell you about yours, Elena said, turning back to Jacob. Let me tell you who David Morgan really was. She took her hand away from the laptop and instead reached for the rifle. Hartford's finger tightened on the trigger, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid, the physiological signs of a man about to commit an irreversible act. But before he could fire, Elena did something unexpected. She pulled the bolt back, ejecting the chambered round, and set the massive rifle down on the ground, surrendering her weapon, choosing words over violence. Your father was the best man I ever knew, she said to Jacob, her voice steady and clear. He was kind, thoughtful. He wrote terrible poetry and cried during movies and believed that doing the right thing mattered more than following orders. When we discovered what Operation Nightfall really was, he did not hesitate. He recorded the evidence because he knew it was the only way to stop it from happening again. She stepped forward, hands visible and empty, closing the distance to Jacob until they stood less than 5 feet apart. And when they came to kill us, when 8 operators surrounded us in a dry riverbed in Afghanistan, he had a choice. He could have run with me. We might have both made it out. But he knew that if we both died, the evidence died with us. So he gave me the recording, ordered me to run, and he stayed behind to buy me time. Tears were tracking down her face now, the first time Marcus had seen her cry since the photograph had appeared on her kitchen table. The last thing he said to me was, "Live and tell the truth when it is safe." And I have been waiting 33 years for it to be safe. But it is never safe. There is just choosing to speak or choosing to stay silent. And I am done being silent. She turned back to Hartford, and her voice hardened. Your father sent those 8 operators. Your father gave the order that killed David Morgan. And your father was killed by the same people he served because he became a loose end. You know this. Deep down, you have always known this. That is why you have spent your career in intelligence, trying to find out what really happened, trying to make sense of a death that never made sense. Hartford's hand was shaking now, the pistol wavering between Elena and the laptop. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His breathing had become ragged, the careful control of a trained operator breaking down under the weight of 30 years of lies colliding with present truth. If I let you release that recording, my father's name becomes mud. Everything he built, everything he stood for, it all gets destroyed. Perhaps, Elena said quietly, or perhaps the truth finally sets him free. Perhaps being remembered as a man who made mistakes is better than being remembered as a hero who never existed. The silence that followed stretched like wire pulled to breaking point. Hartford's 6 operators were watching their principal, waiting for orders, hands on weapons, but not yet committed to violence. They were professionals. They knew that drawing down on a Marine base in broad daylight would end only one way. And then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came a sound none of them expected. The whoop of police sirens, multiple vehicles approaching fast, the distinctive wail of law enforcement responding to an emergency call. Hartford spun, and Marcus saw realization hit him like a physical blow. His eyes went wide. His tactical mind processed the implications in microseconds. Someone had called the police. Someone had made sure that this confrontation would have witnesses that Hartford could not control or eliminate. The 6 operators on the perimeter began looking around, confusion breaking their tactical focus. This was not part of the plan. This was not supposed to happen. And then Colonel Sarah Brennan stepped out from behind one of the SUVs, where she had apparently been hiding since before they arrived. She held up her phone, and Marcus could see the red recording light still blinking. "I called them," Brennan said, her voice carrying military authority that made even Hartford pause. "I have been documenting this entire encounter. Every threat, every weapon drawn, every word about classified operations and conspiracies to commit murder. By my count, Captain Hartford, you are currently in violation of about 15 articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." She walked forward with the confident stride of someone who had nothing to fear, a full colonel with 26 years of service and the moral authority that came from choosing right over expedient. "I also took the liberty of calling the FBI, the real FBI, not whatever shadow unit you pretend to represent. They are very interested in talking to you about the death of Major John Hartford, about the harassment of Elena Cross, about the unauthorized use of military resources for personal vendettas." The police cars, 3 of them, skidded to a stop at the range entrance. FBI vehicles were right behind them, black Suburbans with the distinctive blue and gold markings that meant federal jurisdiction and serious consequences. And emerging from the lead vehicle was a woman in her 50s wearing an FBI windbreaker and carrying credentials that she held up for everyone to see. "Special Agent Linda Reeves," she called out, "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Everyone lower your weapons, now." Hartford looked around wildly, his carefully constructed scenario collapsing into chaos around him. His operators were lowering their weapons, hands going up, training overriding loyalty when federal agents appeared with lights and cameras and the full weight of law enforcement authority. Jacob had stepped away, creating distance, his own weapon still holstered but his stance ready for whatever came next. His face showed the confusion of a man whose worldview was being restructured in real time, whose understanding of heroes and villains was being inverted. It was over. Hartford had lost. The confrontation he had orchestrated had turned into a federal investigation with witnesses and recordings and evidence that he could not make disappear. But in that moment of defeat, Hartford made his final choice. The choice of a man who had spent his entire life trying to redeem a father's tarnished legacy and now saw that legacy about to be destroyed utterly and publicly. The choice of someone who believed that if he could not save his father's name, he could at least have revenge against the woman who had survived when his father had not. He turned the Glock toward Elena, his finger tightening on the trigger, choosing violence over surrender. "For my father," he said, and the words came out like a prayer or a curse. The shot rang out impossibly loud in the open air, the sharp crack of a 9mm round, leaving the barrel at supersonic velocity. But it went high, the round cracking over Elena's head and into the dirt berm behind her, because Jacob had moved with the speed born of combat-trained reflexes and the muscle memory of 100 close-quarters battles. He hit Hartford from the side, a tackle that drove both men to the ground in a tangle of limbs and rage and grief. The pistol skittered across the dirt, spinning end over end before coming to rest 10 feet from the struggling men. They grappled for a moment, Hartford trying to reach another weapon, Jacob pinning him down with superior leverage and younger strength in the desperate energy of a man who had just saved the life of the woman who held the truth about his father's death. Jacob's hand found Hartford's wrist, twisted hard, and Marcus heard the distinct pop of a joint dislocating. Hartford screamed, a sound of pure animal pain and frustration. And then FBI agents were swarming in, separating them, zip ties appearing on Hartford's wrists with practiced efficiency. Miranda rights being read in calm professional tones that stood in stark contrast to the violence that had just unfolded. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Hartford was hauled to his feet, his face twisted with pain and rage and the terrible understanding that everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, had just disintegrated in the space of 30 seconds. "She is lying," he shouted as the agents led him toward the SUV. "My father was a patriot. He served his country. You are all making a mistake." But no one was listening. The 6 operators were being detained for questioning, their careers likely over regardless of what charges might follow. Brennan was giving a statement to Special Agent Reeves, her voice calm and professional, years of military discipline allowing her to present facts without editorializing. Marcus moved to Elena, checking her for injuries even though the shot had missed by a comfortable margin. She was standing perfectly still, watching Jacob with an expression that mixed grief and pride and something that might have been hope. Jacob stood slowly, brushing dirt from his clothes, his dislocated wrist already beginning to swell. An FBI agent approached to offer medical attention, but Jacob waved him off, his eyes locked on Elena. He walked over to her, each step deliberate, and when he stood before her, Marcus could see tears tracking through the dust on his face. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything you said about my father?" "Every word," Elena replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "He was a hero, not the kind that gets medals and parades. The kind that does the right thing even when it costs everything. The kind that saves his partner even when it means he does not come home. The kind that believes truth matters more than his own life." Jacob nodded slowly, processing 32 years of questions and grief and the aching absence of a father he never knew finally finding some small measure of context and understanding. "I want to hear the recording," he said. "All of it. I want to know exactly what he died for." Elena looked at the laptop, at the evidence that had hung over her life like a sword for 33 years. Then she looked at Colonel Brennan, who was finishing her statement to the FBI, and at Special Agent Reeves, who was watching with sharp professional interest. "Not yet," she said. "First, I need to make sure that releasing it does the right thing for the right reasons. Your father taught me that truth matters, but he also taught me that timing matters, and consequences matter." She turned to Marcus. "Help me pack up. We have about 70 minutes before that dead man switch activates, and I need to decide if the world is ready for what David knew." They worked in silence, breaking down the position, securing the rifle, disconnecting the laptop. Around them, FBI agents took statements, photographed evidence, loaded Hartford into a vehicle for transport. The scene had the organized chaos of law enforcement doing what it did best, documenting and preserving and building cases that would stand up in federal court. Special Agent Reeves approached as they finished. "Ms. Cross, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have a lot of questions, and I suspect the answers are going to require classified briefings and lawyers and probably congressional oversight." Elena nodded. I understand, but first I need to make a phone call to a lawyer who specializes in whistleblower protections. Reeves smiled thinly. Already ahead of you. We have Rebecca Chen from the ACLU on standby. She represented the Pentagon paper source. If anyone can navigate this minefield, it is her. Colonel Brennan approached, her face showing the strain of what she had just done. Calling the FBI on a fellow officer, even a rogue one, was not something that came easily to someone who had spent a lifetime valuing the chain of command and unit cohesion. That was either the bravest thing I have ever seen or the most foolish, she said, though her tone suggested she knew which one it was. I have been waiting 3 decades for you to finish what you started. Do not waste it now. That recording, if it is real, needs to see daylight, but carefully, through proper channels, not as revenge, but as justice. Elena shouldered the rifle case. I know. That is why I called you last week. That is why I told you what Hartford was planning. I knew you would do the right thing when the moment came. Brennan's eyes widened slightly. You knew I would call the FBI? I hoped you would. You were always the one who believed the system could work if people had the courage to make it work. I was counting on that. A small smile touched Brennan's lips. You used me as backup. I used you as a witness. There is a difference. Jacob approached one final time before the FBI agents led him away for his own statement. He held something in his hand, a compass, old and brass and worn smooth by decades of handling. Captain Hartford gave this to me, he said. Said it belonged to my father. Said it was the only thing recovered from his body after he was killed. I want you to have it back. Elena took it with shaking hands, recognizing it immediately. It was the compass she had carried on every mission, the one David had lent her because she had a tendency to get turned around in unfamiliar terrain. After he died, she thought it was lost forever, destroyed along with everything else that might have connected her to Operation Nightfall. She opened the case, and inside the lid was an inscription in careful handwriting. To David, may you always find your way home. Love, Sarah. I carried this on every mission, Elena said quietly, her voice breaking. David let me use it because I got lost more than I wanted to admit. After he died, I thought they destroyed everything. I thought all physical evidence of who we were was gone. She held it out to Jacob. It should be yours. Your mother gave it to him. It belongs with his family. Jacob closed her fingers around it. Keep it. Use it. Find your way through whatever comes next. And when it is over, when the truth is finally out and my father's name is cleared, then you can give it back. To me. In person. So we can talk about the man we both lost and both loved and both owe everything to. He walked away before she could respond, heading toward the FBI agents who wanted his statement, leaving Elena standing with the compass that had guided David through a dozen wars and now somehow had found its way back to her hands. Marcus touched her arm gently. What are you going to do? Elena looked at the laptop, at the countdown timer that showed 62 minutes remaining before the automatic upload would begin. She opened it and entered a code. The timer stopped. The upload canceled. The evidence secured but not released. Not yet, she said. First, we do this right, through lawyers and courts and proper procedures. We make sure that when this comes out, it does not just destroy people. It changes things. It prevents the next Operation Nightfall, the next order to kill witnesses, the next cover-up. And if they try to stop you, then we release it all. Everything. Let the world judge. She closed the laptop and looked at Marcus. You did not sign up for any of this. You just wanted to learn how to shoot better, how to read the wind. And instead, you got dragged into a 33-year-old conspiracy and nearly got killed by a rogue intelligence officer. Best training I ever had, Marcus said. And despite everything, he was smiling. They walked together toward the parking area, past FBI agents and confused Marines who had shown up for routine range time and found a crime scene. Past Hartford being loaded into a vehicle, his face a mask of defeat and barely contained fury. Past Jacob giving his statement with the same careful precision his father would have used, choosing each word with the awareness that truth matters and accuracy saves lives. At her truck, Elena set the rifle case in the bed and turned to face the range one more time. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning haze, revealing the full scope of the landscape. Miles of distance, layers of terrain, the complexity of a world that refused to be simple. Do you think David would have approved? Marcus asked. Of how you handled this? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hand unconsciously going to the compass in her pocket, feeling its weight, its promise, its connection to a past that was finally becoming something other than burden. I think David would have wanted the truth to matter more than revenge. I think he would have wanted his son to know him as he really was, not as a legend or a lie. And I think he would have wanted me to live, fully, not just survive, but actually live. That is what he died for. Not so I could hide, so I could make his sacrifice mean something. She climbed into the truck, and the engine started with its usual reluctant cough. But today, it sounded different to Marcus. Not the death rattle of an ancient machine, but the stubborn refusal of something old to give up, to quit, to disappear quietly into history. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Elena smiled, and this time it reached her eyes, transforming her face into something younger, lighter, less burdened by decades of secrets and survival. "Bring your notepad," she said. "We have a lot of work to do." The shot was just the beginning. Now comes the hard part. She drove away, and Marcus watched the old pickup truck navigate the base roads with the same careful competence Elena brought to everything. And he understood, finally, what she had been trying to teach him from the beginning. It was not about the rifle. It was never about the rifle. It was about understanding that some things mattered more than technology, more than data, more than the clean efficiency of modern warfare. Truth mattered. Honor mattered. The promise you made to the people who saved your life mattered. And sometimes the most important shot you ever took was the one you did not take. The moment you chose words over violence, patience over revenge, justice over expedience. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the recording Brennan had shared with him. The video of Hartford's threats, his drawn weapon, his confession about trying to bury the truth about his father. Evidence. Insurance. The beginning of a story that would take years to fully tell, but that had finally, after 33 years of silence, found its voice. He walked back towards his barracks, past Marines running through training that would prepare them for wars that might never come, past ranges where targets stood waiting for bullets that would teach precision and discipline and the fundamental mathematics of violence. But he was learning something deeper now, something that could not be reduced to numbers or calculated by computers or programmed into the most advanced ballistic software ever created. The patience of ghosts, the discipline of memory, the long arc of justice that bent slowly but never, ever broke. 3 miles away, Elena Cross drove toward a future that was uncertain and dangerous and full of legal battles that would consume years of her life and test every skill she had learned in decades of operating in the shadows. But the weight that had pressed on her shoulders for 33 years was lighter now. Not gone. It would never be completely gone, but lighter. She had kept her promise to David, had protected the truth until the moment was right, and now, with lawyers and courts and proper procedures, she would finish what he had started. Live and tell the truth when it is safe. It would never be completely safe. Safety was an illusion, a myth, a comfort for people who had never operated in the spaces between law and necessity. But it was time, finally time, and that would have to be enough. 6 months later, the hearing room in the Russell Senate office building felt like a cathedral built to bureaucracy. High ceilings that swallowed sound and amplified authority. Dark wood paneling that had witnessed decades of testimony, confession, and the slow grinding machinery of governmental oversight. Rows of seats filled with reporters whose pens moved in synchronized rhythm. Military officials whose faces showed carefully controlled emotions, and family members of soldiers who had served in wars both acknowledged and denied. The air conditioning hummed with the persistent white noise of institutional power, but it could not quite mask the tension that filled the space like electricity before a storm. Elena Cross sat at the witness table, a simple wooden chair that had supported the weight of countless testimonies over the years. She wore a plain gray suit that made her look smaller than she was, more vulnerable, exactly the image her lawyer Rebecca Chen had recommended. Let them see a grandmother, not an operator. Let them underestimate you right up until the moment you detonate the truth in their faces. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence faced her from their elevated dais, 7 senators who had collectively served over a century in government and believed they had seen everything. But the documents spread before them told a story that none of them had expected, a narrative that connected war crimes to cover-ups to murders disguised as accidents across 3 decades and 4 administrations. Senator Patricia Morrison, the committee chair, A woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and eyes that had watched administrations rise and fall, adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at Elena with an expression that mixed skepticism and curiosity. Ms. Cross, let me make sure I understand your testimony correctly. You are claiming that in September 1991, you were ordered to assassinate a man who was not a terrorist, but a witness to American war crimes. That your spotter, Sergeant David Morgan, recorded evidence of this conspiracy. That when you attempted to report this through proper channels, you were ambushed by American Special Operations Forces. And that this cover-up has continued for 33 years, resulting in multiple deaths, including that of Major John Hartford, father of the recently arrested Captain James Hartford. Elena leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady despite the cameras, despite the weight of history pressing down on this moment. That is correct, Senator. That is quite an accusation. Morrison set down her glasses. It implicates multiple flag officers, some of whom have since died. It suggests a conspiracy that would require dozens of people maintaining silence for over 3 decades. And your primary evidence is a recording that, conveniently, was hidden for 30 years and only surfaced when you were threatened. The recording was not hidden, Senator. It was protected. There is a difference. I was a 29-year-old corporal who had just watched my partner die to save my life. I was interrogated by people who told me in very clear terms that if I spoke publicly, I would be charged with treason, my family would be targeted, and the evidence would be dismissed as propaganda. So I did what David Morgan died to make possible. I survived. I waited, and I gathered more evidence. She nodded to Rebecca Chen, who opened a laptop and began displaying documents on the large screen behind the committee. Service records, communications logs. After action reports that had been classified until Chen's legal motions had forced their release under the Freedom of Information Act. This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Reyes, currently serving as the Senior Marksmanship Instructor at Quantico. In 1991, he was a corporal in 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion. He has testified under oath that he witnessed irregularities in the after-action report for the operation where Sergeant Morgan died. Discrepancies between what operators reported in debriefings and what appeared in official records 6 months later. The screen changed to show another photograph. Colonel Sarah Brennan in dress blues, medals gleaming, the hard-won decorations of a career spent in service to ideals that sometimes conflicted with orders. This is Colonel Brennan, who has testified that she was approached in 1992 by intelligence officials who wanted access to personnel records for Elena Cross, who asked her to provide information about my location, my activities, my contacts. She refused and was subsequently transferred to assignments that effectively ended her advancement. A decorated Marine officer punished for protecting a whistleblower. Senator James Cartwright, a former Army officer who had served in the First Gulf War, leaned forward. His voice carried the gravel of a man who had screamed orders over artillery fire and never quite lost the habit of command. Colonel Brennan's testimony is compelling, but it does not prove your central claim. It proves there was interest in finding you. It does not prove there was a conspiracy to commit war crimes or to cover them up. For that, we need the recording, the actual evidence that Sergeant Morgan supposedly created. Elena reached into the leather satchel beside her chair and pulled out the waterproof case, sealed with wax that had hardened over 33 years of waiting. She held it up so the cameras could see, so the reporters could photograph, so history could mark this moment when secrets became testimony. This contains the complete audio recording made by Sergeant David Morgan on September 18, 1991. It includes the briefing where we were told General Rashid Khalil was a terrorist facilitator. It includes the conversations Morgan recorded during our 3 days of observation. And it includes the voices of 3 American officers discussing the massacre of 43 civilians in a village near Kandahar, discussing how Khalil was preparing to testify about what he witnessed, and discussing the necessity of eliminating him before that testimony could occur. She set the case on the table, and the sound of it touching wood echoed through the silent chamber like a judge's gavel falling. Senator Morrison looked at the case like it might explode, like opening it would release consequences that could never be contained again. And you are willing to allow this committee to review this recording in classified session? I am willing to do more than that, Senator. I am willing to have it released publicly. Every word, every name. Let the American people hear what their soldiers were ordered to do. Let them decide if this was national security or criminal conspiracy. The room erupted. Reporters began shouting questions. Senators argued among themselves, voices rising in heated debate. Security personnel moved to restore order, their presence a reminder that even in this temple of democracy, force was sometimes necessary to maintain the illusion of civilized discourse. But through it all, Elena sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her breathing calm and controlled. The stillness of an operator who had made her shot and was waiting to see where the round impacted. Senator Morrison called for order with sharp raps of her gavel, the sound cutting through the chaos like gunfire. When the room finally quieted, she turned to her fellow committee members. There was a brief, whispered consultation, hands covering microphones, the private calculations of people who understood that their next decision would define their legacies. Then she returned her attention to Elena. This committee will take custody of the evidence. We will review it in classified session with appropriate security measures and forensic verification. If it contains what you claim, we will determine the appropriate course of action. That may include criminal referrals. It may include declassification. But I want to be very clear, Ms. Cross. If this recording does not support your allegations, if it proves to be fabricated or misrepresented, you will face charges of perjury, obstruction of justice, and possibly treason. Elena met her eyes without flinching. I understand, Senator. I have lived with the weight of this truth for 33 years. I am ready for whatever consequences come from finally speaking it. The hearing recessed, and Elena was led to a private conference room where Rebecca Chen waited with coffee and the grim satisfaction of a lawyer who knew they had just changed history, had just set in motion events that would reshape how America understood its own wars. That went better than I expected, Chen said, pouring coffee into institutional mugs that had witnessed 1,000 other moments of crisis and revelation. Morrison is tough, but fair. If the recording is authentic, and I have no doubt it is, and the forensics team confirms it has not been altered in 3 decades, they will have to act. The political pressure alone will force their hand. And if they do not, then we go public anyway. Leak it to the media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, every major outlet simultaneously so they cannot bury it. Force their hand. But that is the nuclear option. Better to let the process work if it will. Better to give the system a chance to police itself. Elena sipped her coffee, tasting nothing, her mind replaying the moment she had set the case on the table. 33 years of carrying that weight, and in a single gesture, she had transferred it to the shoulders of people with the power to do something about it, to make David's death mean something beyond classified files and unmarked graves. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Kane, who was watching the hearing from Quantico, where he was now serving as the assistant chief instructor for the Scout Sniper School, a position that would have been unthinkable for someone his age 6 months ago. You did it. David would be proud. We all are. The students are watching on live stream. You just became a legend. Another text came through, this one from a number she did not recognize but had been expecting, hoping for, dreading in equal measure. I watched the hearing. Thank you for telling the truth about my father. Can we meet? Tomorrow, same place we first talked. I have something to show you. Jacob Morgan. Elena typed back quickly, her fingers still steady despite everything. Tomorrow. 0800, I will bring coffee. The next morning came too quickly and too slowly, time moving with the strange elasticity of anticipation and hope, in the fear that this fragile connection with David's son might shatter under the weight of everything unsaid, everything that could never be fully explained. Elena drove to Quantico through autumn air that smelled of wood smoke and dying leaves. The Virginia countryside dressed in colors that reminded her of old photographs, faded but still beautiful, still worth preserving. Jacob was waiting at firing point 7 when she arrived, standing in the exact spot where she had made the impossible shot that had started everything. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a field jacket that looked like military surplus, and he held 2 cups of coffee from the base exchange, steam rising in the cool morning air. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her one. Strong and black, right? Elena accepted it, surprised and touched that he had remembered her preference from their single conversation 6 months ago. They stood in silence for a moment, looking out across the range toward the distant target that had become something of a legend among the Marines who trained here. The 3-mile shot, the impossible made real by an old woman with an older rifle. I have been going through my father's things, Jacob said finally, his voice carrying the weight of months spent excavating a past he had never known. My mother kept everything. Letters he wrote from deployments, photographs from training, his old gear, his uniforms. And there was a journal he kept. Did you know he wrote in a journal? Elena shook her head, emotion tightening her throat, making speech difficult. Poetry, mostly. Like you said, terrible poetry, but honest, raw. He wrote about you, about the missions, about how scared he was sometimes, but how he believed in what you were doing. Believed that precision and discipline and patience could change outcomes, save lives. Jacob reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound book, worn and stained with the marks of hard use, filled with pages of handwriting that Elena recognized even from a distance. David's careful script, the product of a man who believed in taking time, getting things right. There is an entry from the night before Operation Nightfall. He wrote that he had a bad feeling about the mission, that something did not add up in the intelligence briefing, that the usual markers of solid intel were missing. But he trusted you, said that if it went wrong, you would know what to do, that you would make it mean something. He handed her the journal, and Elena took it with shaking hands, her vision blurring with tears that she no longer tried to hide. She opened to the marked page and read David's words, written in the careful script of a man who believed in documentation, in leaving a record. Tomorrow we deploy for what they are calling a high-value target elimination. Elena is focused like I have never seen her. She knows something is wrong with this op, I can tell, but orders are orders and we are operators. We follow orders even when they smell bad. If this goes sideways, I trust her to make it mean something. She is the best operator I have ever worked with, the best friend I have ever had, the best person I know. If I do not make it back, I hope someone tells Jacob that his father died trying to do the right thing. That matters. In the end, that is all that matters. Doing right even when it costs everything. Elena read the words twice, 3 times. Tears falling onto the page and smearing ink that had survived 33 years only to be marked by her grief, her gratitude, her overwhelming sense of loss for a man who had believed in her when she had not believed in herself. He knew, she whispered. He knew it might be his last mission, and he went anyway. Because he trusted you, Jacob said. Because he believed the mission was worth the risk. And because I think he wanted his son to grow up in a world where truth mattered more than convenience, where doing right meant something even when it cost everything. They stood together in silence, 2 people bound by the memory of a man who had died before his time, but had lived with purpose that transcended the brevity of his years, that echoed through decades and touched lives he would never know. The FBI investigation of Captain Hartford has uncovered more than we expected, Jacob said after a while. Turns out he was not working alone. There is a whole network of people, retired officers mostly, who have spent decades trying to keep Operation Nightfall buried. Some of them are still alive. Some are in positions of real power. The investigation is ongoing. Elena looked at him sharply. Are you in danger? Jacob smiled, and it was David's smile, lopsided and self-deprecating, and carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much to believe in safety. I am an Army operator with classified clearance and combat experience in 3 theaters. I am exactly the kind of asset they would try to recruit or eliminate, but I have made it very clear where I stand. I testified at your hearing. I released my father's journal entries to the committee. I burned my bridges with the people who want this buried. That will cost you, maybe, or maybe it saves me. Hard to kill someone who has already gone public with everything they know. Too many questions, too much attention. He turned to face her fully, and his expression was serious, carrying echoes of decisions made and paths chosen. I am being assigned to a training detail at Fort Bragg, teaching advanced reconnaissance to newer operators. It is a good assignment, keeps me stateside, keeps me visible, and it gives me access to records, to old-timers who were around during the early 90s who might remember things that never made it into official reports. You are continuing the investigation. Someone has to. The Senate committee is doing what they can, but they are politicians. They are looking for what can be proved in court, what can be declassified without embarrassing the wrong people too badly. I am looking for the whole truth. All of it, however ugly it gets. Elena studied him, seeing David's determination mixed with the harder edge that came from modern warfare. From deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, from places that made the Cold War conflicts look almost quaint by comparison. Your father would tell you to be careful, to trust your instincts, to never let the mission make you forget why you are fighting in the first place. I know, I read that in his journal too, almost word for word. He set down his coffee cup and pulled something else from his pocket. The compass. The brass compass Elena had carried on every mission until David died, that had somehow survived and found its way back. I want you to keep this. Use it to find your way through whatever comes next. And when it is all over, when the truth is finally settled and my father's name is cleared, you can give it back. We will sit down somewhere quiet and you can tell me every story about him. The good, the bad, the classified, all of it. Elena took the compass, feeling its familiar weight, the smooth brass warmth from Jacob's pocket and from the 33 years it had spent waiting to come home. I promise. Every story, however long it takes. They shook hands, and Jacob walked back to his car, leaving Elena standing at the firing point where everything had changed. She opened the compass, checked the heading, and smiled despite the tears still wet on her face. North, always north, toward truth, toward home, toward the next mission. 3 months later, the Senate Intelligence Committee released its findings. The report was 247 pages of careful language and diplomatic phrasing, but the conclusions were devastating in their clarity and their implications for how America understood its own history. Operation Nightfall had been based on fabricated intelligence. General Rashid Khalil had been a witness to war crimes, not a terrorist. The ambush of Elena Cross and David Morgan had been an illegal action ordered by officers who were attempting to prevent the exposure of those crimes. Major John Hartford had been murdered to prevent him from becoming a whistleblower himself when the weight of his own conscience had begun to crack under the burden of what he knew. 5 retired generals were referred for investigation by the Department of Justice. 3 sitting colonels were relieved of command pending court-martial proceedings. The special operations community was rocked by revelations that some of their most decorated units had been used for illegal domestic operations against American personnel who threatened to expose inconvenient truths. And David Morgan, whose name had appeared on no memorials, whose service had been classified to the point of erasure, was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in protecting evidence of war crimes at the cost of his own life, for choosing truth over survival, for believing that some things mattered more than coming home. The ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery on a cold February morning when the ground was frozen and the sky was the color of gunmetal. Elena stood in the front row wearing the only dress uniform she still owned from her service, the old-style BDUS that dated her as a relic from an earlier era of warfare. Beside her stood Jacob in his army dress blues, his chest bearing the decorations of his own service in Iraq and Afghanistan, 3 bronze stars and a purple heart that testified to courage under fire. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes was there, along with Colonel Brennan and dozens of other operators who had known David or known of him through the whisper network of the special operations community. Marcus Kane stood at attention in his dress blues, his face solemn, understanding now what it meant to be part of a legacy that transcended individual achievement, that connected generations of warriors through shared values and sacrifice. The Marine Corps band played as David's name was added to the wall of Medal of Honor recipients, bronze letters that would outlast everyone who remembered him in life. His photograph, young and serious, and full of the confidence that came from believing in something bigger than himself, was unveiled. And the citation was read aloud by a general who had not been born when David died, each word carefully chosen to honor his sacrifice without revealing the classified details that still remain buried in government vaults. For extraordinary heroism and selfless sacrifice in the face of enemy action. Sergeant David Morgan distinguished himself through his courageous actions during a classified operation in September 1991. When his unit came under attack from superior forces, Sergeant Morgan exposed himself to enemy fire to allow his teammate to escape with critical intelligence that would later prevent future atrocities. His actions directly led to the preservation of evidence that upheld the highest traditions of military service and American values. Sergeant Morgan's gallantry, intrepidity, and devotion to duty reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Armed Forces. The words echoed across the cemetery, joining the countless other citations that marked the graves of heroes who had given everything in service of ideals that were sometimes honored and sometimes forgotten, but never quite extinguished. After the ceremony, after the formal photos and the handshakes from officials who wanted to be seen supporting transparency and accountability, Elena walked alone among the white headstones. Each one marked a life cut short, a story truncated, a future stolen by violence and duty and the terrible arithmetic of war. She found herself at the grave of Major John Hartford. The headstone was simple, unmarked by any indication of the controversy that now surrounded his name. The investigations that were unraveling the careful lies of his career. Beloved husband and father, died in service to his country. Someone had left flowers, recent flowers, maybe from that morning. Elena knelt and touched the petals, wondering if it had been James Hartford, the son who had tried to protect his father's legacy and ended up revealing its darkest corners. He was in federal prison now, awaiting trial on charges that would likely keep him there for the rest of his life. Conspiracy, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, the weight of his father's sins plus his own. I am sorry, Elena said quietly to the stone, to the man who had made terrible choices in impossible situations. For what happened to you, for what your choices cost your family. David never wanted any of this. He just wanted to do the right thing, to save lives, to make the world a little better than he found it. The wind stirred the bare branches of the oak trees that provided shade in summer and stark geometry in winter. Elena stood brushing frozen dirt from her knees and turned to find Jacob standing a respectful distance away, giving her space for private grief. My father wrote something else in that journal, he said, his breath misting in the cold air. The last entry dated the day before he died. I did not show it to you before because I was not sure you needed to see it. But now, after today, I think maybe you do. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph of a journal page. The handwriting was rushed, less careful than usual, the words of a man writing quickly because time was running short and there was so much left unsaid. If I do not make it back, someone needs to tell Elena that she was the best partner I could have asked for. That serving with her made me a better operator and a better man. That if she survived and I did not, I am grateful beyond words. Not because I am noble or selfless, but because she has more work to do, more shots to take, more truth to protect. She is the one who can finish this. I am just the one who helped her get there. Tell her I said to live well, to find joy, to remember that survival is not the same as living, and she has earned the right to do both. Tell her to teach someone else what we learned together. Tell her the mission continues. Tell her I love her like the sister I never had. Tell her goodbye. Elena read the words through tears that blurred the screen, through the overwhelming weight of permission she had not known she needed. Permission to move forward, to build a life that was more than just waiting for the right moment to reveal secrets, to become something other than the keeper of David's legacy. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice breaking, for showing me this, for sharing him with me, even though you never got to know him yourself. He would have wanted you to know, Jacob said. He would have wanted you to live the life he bought for you with his death. They walked together toward the cemetery exit where Marcus Kane was waiting beside Elena's truck, respectfully distant but available if needed. At the gate, Jacob pulled Elena into a brief embrace, the first physical contact between them beyond handshakes, and she felt the tremor in his shoulders that spoke of grief finally finding outlet. The Whisper Foundation, he said as they separated, that is what I am calling it. A foundation for children of special operations personnel killed in classified missions. Kids who grow up like I did, knowing their parent died, but never knowing why. Never getting the closure that comes from understanding. I want you to be on the board. Help me build something that makes my father's death mean something beyond medals and hearings. I would be honored, Elena said. They worked on it together over the following months, navigating the bureaucracy of nonprofit status, raising money from veterans organizations and defense contractors who wanted to support military families while also managing their own public relations after the Operation Nightfall revelations. The foundation grew slowly but steadily, providing scholarships and counseling and support to hundreds of children who had lost parents to wars that could not be discussed at dinner tables or memorial services. Elena threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had brought to operating. She testified at additional hearings. She worked with documentary filmmakers who wanted to tell the story of Phantom Cell and the operators who had served in the shadows. She spoke at military academies about ethics in difficult decisions and the weight of carrying secrets. And she taught. 3 days a week at Quantico, working with Marcus to train a new generation of scout snipers in the old skills that no amount of technology could replace. The students came skeptical and left humbled, learning that the woman who looked like their grandmother that could outshoot them at any range in any conditions because she had spent decades becoming one with her craft. Marcus proved to be a natural teacher, his technical knowledge combining with Elena's intuitive understanding to create a curriculum that honored both the old ways and the new. They developed exercises that forced students to engage with the environment rather than just read data from screens, to feel the wind on their faces and understand what it was telling them, to practice the stillness that came from absolute confidence and preparation. On the first anniversary of David's Medal of Honor ceremony, Elena and Jacob met at Arlington again. But this time they did not stand at his grave. They walked to the tomb of the unknown soldier and watched the changing of the guard, the precise ritual that marked respect for all those who had served without name or recognition. "I have been thinking about the future of the Foundation," Jacob said as they watched the Sentinel pace his measured route, "about expanding it, not just supporting families, but creating a scholarship program for students who want to study military ethics, war crimes prevention, accountability in classified operations." "The David Morgan Scholarship," Elena suggested. "The David Morgan Scholarship for Military Ethics," Jacob corrected. "Make it clear what he stood for, what he died for." They worked on it together, reaching out to universities, to think tanks, to organizations that specialized in military justice and international law. The scholarship program launched 2 years after the hearing, with its first class of 20 students from across the country, each one committed to understanding how to prevent the next Operation Nightfall, how to build systems that allowed soldiers to do right even when orders demanded wrong. And on the second anniversary of the Medal of Honor ceremony, Elena returned to Firing Point 7 at Quantico with a group that included Jacob, Marcus, Colonel Brennan, Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, and 24 of her best students. They gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, waiting for the sun to rise over the range, each of them carrying the weight of knowledge about what this place meant, what had started here. Elena had brought Nightfall, the rifle that had carried her through decades of service and survival. She assembled it slowly, lovingly, as the eastern sky began to lighten. The brass scope gleamed. The walnut stock felt warm under her hands despite the morning chill. The bolt moved with the precision of thousands of repetitions, the mechanical memory of a tool perfectly matched to its purpose. "Today," she said to the assembled group, "we honor Sergeant David Morgan by doing what he taught me to do. We take an impossible shot and make it possible through preparation, patience, and absolute commitment to the craft." The sun broke the horizon, painting the range in shades of gold and amber. Elena settled into her shooting position, and the students watched as she went through the ritual they had all learned but few had truly mastered. The integration with the earth, the controlled breathing, the patient observation of wind and heat and distance. The target was the same one she had hit almost 2 years ago. 4,800 meters, 3 miles. Impossible by any reasonable standard except that she had done it before and would to do it again, not to prove anything, but to remember, to honor, to keep a promise. Marcus served as her spotter, calling the wind with the precision David had taught through Elena's instruction. Through months of practice and the transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. 3 minutes left to right at the surface, 5 minutes at altitude, pressure rising, temperature stable. Elena made her calculations, the same ones David had made 1,000 times in 100 different environments. She adjusted the scope's external dials with click after precise click. She loaded a single cartridge, chambered it, felt the bolt lock home with satisfying mechanical certainty, and then she waited. Waited for the world to align, for the wind to settle into its pattern, for her heartbeat to slow to the point where she could press the trigger between beats. In that moment of perfect stillness, when everything became possible. The sun climbed higher. The students watched without speaking, barely breathing. This was not just a demonstration. It was a ceremony, a remembrance, a promise kept across the years in the distance and the unbridgeable gap between the living and the dead. When Elena finally pressed the trigger, the boom rolled across the range like thunder announcing a storm that would never arrive. The bullet arced into the sky, climbing hundreds of feet above the line of sight, tracing a path that would take 11 seconds to complete, 11 seconds of physics and faith and the accumulated skill of decades. Everyone tracked it through optics. 11 seconds of breath held, 11 seconds of hope in mathematics and the belief that if you did everything right, the universe would cooperate. The impact flare erupted from the center of the distant target. Dead center. Perfect. And 2 seconds later, the clang of metal reached them. Confirmation of the impossible made real through patience and practice, and the refusal to accept that some things were beyond human capability. The students erupted in cheers. Marcus clapped her on the shoulder. Jacob stood with tears running down his face, seeing in that shot the culmination of his father's legacy, the proof that the knowledge David had died to protect had survived and thrived and would continue long after everyone present had joined him in the ground. Elena ejected the brass casing and held it up to catch the morning light. She would keep this one, add it to the small collection of brass from significant shots, each one a marker of a moment when everything aligned and the impossible became inevitable. That evening, back at her farmhouse, Elena sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and David's journal, reading entries she had read 100 times before, but that never failed to move her with their honesty and their humanity. His observations about shooting, his reflections on service and sacrifice, his terrible poetry that was honest in ways that good poetry never quite managed to be. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from Washington. Ms. Cross, this is Senator Morrison. I wanted to inform you personally that the final report on Operation Nightfall and related cover-up activities has been declassified and will be released to the public tomorrow morning. I thought you should know before it hits the news cycles and the phones start ringing. Elena felt her pulse quicken despite 33 years of practice at controlling physiological responses to stress. The whole truth? The whole truth. All of it. The massacre, the cover-up, the murders, everything you testified to has been confirmed and documented and is now part of the public record. It is going to be ugly. There will be calls for investigations into other historical operations, questions about what else has been hidden. But it is the truth, and you are the reason it is finally seeing daylight. Thank you, Senator, for having the courage to do the right thing, even when it would have been easier to bury it again. No, Ms. Cross, thank you. You did what most people would never have the courage to do. You waited 33 years for justice, and you never gave up on getting it. That matters. That inspires. That changes how we think about service and sacrifice and the obligation we owe to truth. After the call ended, Elena sat for a long time watching the sun set over the Virginia hills, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of brass and blood and sacrifice and hope. Tomorrow, the world would know what David had died for, would know that his death had meaning beyond the classified file and the unmarked grave that had been his only monument for 3 decades. She pulled out the compass Jacob had insisted she keep, opened it, checked the heading. North. Always north. Toward truth, toward home, toward the future that David had bought with his last breaths and his last acts of courage. Inside the house, her laptop chimed with incoming emails, messages from reporters wanting interviews, from historians wanting to document her story, from veterans who had suspected the truth but never had proof, from families of other operators who had died in classified operations and wanted to know if their loved ones' deaths had also been more complicated than the official narrative suggested. Tomorrow, Elena would begin answering those questions, would start the next phase of her mission, the phase where survival transformed into testimony, where silence became voice, where the patience of decades paid dividends and changed policies and prevented atrocities. But tonight, she simply sat on her porch with David's compass in one hand and a cup of cooling coffee in the other, watching the stars emerge one by one over the same sky that had witnessed her impossible shot, that had arced the bullet across 3 miles of Virginia air, that had made the legend real and the truth undeniable. Somewhere in the darkness, a whippoorwill called, its voice lonely and persistent and beautiful in its refusal to be silenced. Elena listened until the song faded, until the night wrapped around her farmhouse like a blanket, until the weight of 33 years finally, truly, completely lifted from her shoulders. She had kept her promise, had lived when David died, had protected the truth he recorded, had waited for the right moment, and then acted with the same precision she brought to every shot, every decision, every choice that mattered. And now finally she could rest. Not the rest of ending, but the rest of completion. The satisfaction of a mission accomplished against impossible odds across impossible time. Inside the house, she placed the compass on the mantel beside the photograph of Phantom Cell, 12 operators who had believed in precision and discipline and the kind of patience that could change the world, one carefully placed shot at a time. Beside it, she placed David's journal, open to the last page, to his final words about living well and finishing the mission. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new missions that would require the same patience and precision and commitment to truth. But tonight, Elena Cross allowed herself to simply be, not an operator, not a whistleblower, not a legend, just a woman who had survived, who had remembered, who had honored the memory of the best man she had ever known by becoming the person he believed she could be. She walked to her bedroom and opened the case that held Nightfall. The rifle gleamed in the lamplight, clean and ready, always ready for the next mission, the next impossible shot, the next moment when everything would depend on patience and preparation and the refusal to accept that some things could not be done. And carved into the wood beneath the brass scope mount, in letters so small you would miss them unless you were looking, were two words that David had etched there before their final mission together. Two words that had guided her through 33 years of waiting and surviving and finally speaking. Live well, Elena had, and she would continue to. Not just surviving in the shadows, but living in the light. Teaching, remembering, making sure that the lessons paid for in blood were never forgotten, never dismissed, never buried under convenient narratives that serve power rather than truth. The morning would come with its revelations and reckonings, with its questions and accusations and the messy process of historical truth confronting official mythology. But for now, in this moment, Elena allowed herself to sleep the sleep of the righteous, the sleep of someone who had done the hard thing in the hard way for hard reasons, who had chosen truth over comfort, justice over expedience, memory over forgetting. And in her dreams, David Morgan walked beside her through sunlit ranges where every shot found its mark, where every mission ended in success, where patience and precision and purpose aligned to create moments of impossible beauty, where partners never left each other behind, where promises were always kept, where the shot, the impossible shot that changed everything, always found its way home. The end. This story hit me harder than I expected. Elena waited 33 years, to honor her fallen partner. That's the kind of patience and integrity we don't see much anymore. What struck me most? When she told those young Marines, the shot isn't from the rifle, it happens in your mind. That's wisdom earned through decades of discipline, not downloaded from a computer. I want to hear from you veterans out there. Have you served alongside operators like Elena? Those quiet professionals who never got the recognition they deserved? And for everyone else, do you think she made the right choice, waiting all those years before exposing the truth? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story resonated with you, there are more untold missions waiting. Hit that subscribe button. Every operator's story deserves to be heard.